We're good to go, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you all for your attendance at the September Marine Fish Advisory Commission meeting. And we'll start off with the review and approval of the September business meeting agenda. Everybody's reviewed this, I hope. Any changes need to be made? If not, shall I get a motion to approve?
Khalil here. I
Motion
move
from Cookie Sawyer.
Okay,
Leo,
so
is that a second?
that's a second.
Okay.
yeah, and all those in favor?
Move to
Aye.
unanimous consent. So I think that's probably the easiest way to do this, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, okay. I'm not seeing any opposition, so it's unanimously approved. We'll move along to the review and approval of the August draft business meeting minutes. Has anybody corrections or changes they want to see, please state so.
Cookie, I see your hand raised.
Cookie, you're recognized. Suki, you're recognized.
I lowered my hand, Ray. I got anything.
Oh, I'm sorry. Any other hands? Jared?
Yes, my hand is raised. Mr.
Khalil,
Chairman.
you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to have a correction made to the, or an addition or correction to the minutes. First of all, doing the minutes is not an easy task. The minute manager has a lot of information that he or she has to gather and then put into written form. So obviously there's going to be some typos or misrepresentations. So I'd like to refer to the updates on the August ASMFC meeting and joint ASMFC and the MFC meeting. On page 11, the minute manager, if we please take a look at that. The second to last paragraph. And it needs to say Khalil Bogdan read, not raised. Khalil Bogdan read a statement made by the spring ASMFC. So raised has to be changed to read. And also there's a little bit of a typo. If you go down to the fourth line, to speak to their thoughts, not to their thoughts son, but to their thoughts on. It's just a little bit of a slip with the finger on the keyboard. Do you see what I'm talking about?
Yep. Thank you, Khalil. We'll make those amendments.
Thank you so much.
Any other hands, Jared?
Not seeing any further comments, Mr. Chair.
No further comments, then with no opposition.
But we need a motion.
Somebody please make a motion.
I have a motion for Khalil to adopt the minutes as amended. Is there a second?
I second.
Second from Bill Amaru.
Thank you, Bill.
Please raise your hand if you're opposed to the adoption of these draft business meeting minutes as amended. I'm not seeing any hands raised. We'll move that approved by unanimous consent.
Thank you, Jared. Well, I would just like to open the meeting, thanking everybody for their attendance. I realize it's not our usual Thursday meeting, but there was a conflict for one of our commission members. So thank you all for your attendance. It's stellar once again. And I, as chair, appreciate it. Thank you very much. And I'm going to turn this over to Commissioner Ron Amidon. Commissioner.
I'm not seeing Commissioner Amadon on this morning.
Okay, so we'll move right along to law enforcement. Who's representing law enforcement?
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. It's Matt Bass with the Environmental Police. I can be, I think, exceptionally short this morning. We are just continuing to work on current cases, but I don't think we have anything exceptional to report. If there is a case that somebody has a question about or I'm missing, I'd be certainly happy to answer any questions. But at this point, I don't think I have anything further.
Thank you, Matt. Any questions for Lieutenant Bassett? Any hands
Not seeing
raised?
any questions for law enforcement, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. Lieutenant Bass, it's Ray Kane. I would like to chat with you at some point later today. I'm sure you have my cell number.
Okay, absolutely. I'll give you a call after the meeting.
Thank you very much. Moving along to our stellar director, Director Dan Mckiernan.
Thank you, Ray. Thank you, Commission. I guess the first thing I would mention is Matt Bass, you weren't able to attend, or you weren't in attendance at the Mass Shellfish Officers Association meeting. And that was last week. It was a really good meeting. MSOA is a formal organization of all shellfish constables in the Commonwealth, and we gather with them 4 times a year and give them all kinds of updates about what's going on within DMF shellfish and at the federal level and at the public health level. They are the like almost enforcement agents, so to speak, of for the Commonwealth, because shellfish are under municipal control in town waters. So one thing I do want to mention is one of the issues that was raised by the constables is a collective request by them to provide more clearer guidance on Native American fishing rights. And so it's a cry for help, because it often puts the constable into some uncomfortable situations, because the law is not always as clear as they'd like it to be, and there's sometimes some disagreements with some tribal members. And so everybody involved has pledged to try to work to clarify, the rules on that and what the state's policies are regarding definitions of subsistence, things like that. So if you're a local constable, it's an important issue for you. It doesn't come before us here very much at the state level, but it's pretty painful for those constables. So we're going to work on that and try to improve that situation. Next on my list of things to talk about is I don't have any update on the Strahan case. We're still awaiting a federal judge's decision. It could be any day. And there are many folks involved with all aspects of whale conservation and our commercial fisheries that are really anxious to see the outcome of that case. Rob Glenn is going to be discussing updates to the federal large whale take reduction plan later in the meeting. Next on my list of topics is the CARES Act relief update. DMF sent out applications back in August to all of the potential recipients, with about a 3 or 4 week deadline to have them received. We had sort of workshops where we sent staff to different locations, New Bedford, Chatham, Gloucester, where we were sitting in large rooms waiting to help fishermen one-on-one fill out these applications. And I'm pleased to report that all the applications have been received. They've almost all been completely processed. We're just going over a few appeals, a few incomplete applications, but we fully expect the applications to be completed by this week or early next week. And we expect in the first week of October to be sending the list of recipients to the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission. You'll recall that we're using the ASMFC for accounting purposes. If we would have to cut all those checks ourselves, we would have had to made every one of those recipients a state vendor, which probably takes more time than we want to spend. And most fishermen are probably never going to, they're going to clog the system. There's no reason to make so many people vendors with the state, but nonetheless, so that's our expectation. We've as you recall, we put aside 10% of the 23 million, and we were going to assess the losses among the 4 sectors. And the report coming out of the team that is processing all these is that no one sector appeared to have deeper losses than others. And I think that's because some of the other sectors that did have some real challenges, such as the aquaculturists, they were eligible for other COVID-related money last summer through the FDA. So all of that has to be taken into account when the applications are made to us to describe their losses related to the pandemic in 2020. So we're going to take that 10% and just redistribute it back to the 4 sectors in the same proportions that we initially had set the money aside. You will, one of the complications that we're working on also is the issue of non-resident applicants who are not eligible in their home state, and they're trying to get support through our program. And a lot of those applications we have granted. For example, there are, because like New Bedford and Gloucester are 2 major fishing ports, we do have fishermen in who are non-residents, who are out of state, but who fish exclusively out of our state ports. And it makes sense to accommodate them when we can, because when we depict the losses attributable to COVID, we look at the landings in the previous years and compare it to the landings in 2020, and we highlight that change or that reduction. And so they're part of that. So we are working through those, but that has been one of the challenges that we've been dealing with. They always say you spend 90% of your time on 10% of your cases, and so that's what's going on now. But I also want to say that the commercial fisheries data that the dealers and the harvesters provide us in SAFES and through the federal VTRs makes us able to give out these funds in a manner that's fair and balanced and transparent. And it gives us an opportunity for what we call filters and scalers. And I only raise this because it is labor intensive for fishermen and dealers to be getting this data to us. And it's instances like this that make it really worth it, because we're able to get this money out in a relatively quick and fair fashion. There are some states that don't collect commercial fishing data for all of their harvesters. For example, in Maine, only 10% of the lobster fleet reports. So it makes the fishermen's reports, obviously many don't exist. And on the dealer side, as a manager, I always get a little bit, hesitant to use dealer data to describe a fisherman's activity, because dealers sometimes make mistakes, and it's not being signed by the person like our catch data. So I just want to recognize the industry for all the work that they put in giving us this data, and also I want to recognize the staff who have worked really hard to give us all this data and analyze all this data to make the applicants, especially in the commercial and the aquaculture sector, eligible. The other 2 sectors, for hire and dealers, we didn't use safest data. We're depending on other forms of information, but the most labor intensive for us is those that use the commercial fishing data. So I want to thank them for that. So we're expecting, like I said, to send the list to Asmfc in 1 to 2 weeks. So with any luck, fishermen will have checks in the mail by mid-October. And I also want to mention that this is a pretty intensive project. And of course, the theme is, get it out the door, get it out the door. Let's move. People need this money. And so as a result, it does delay the completion of a lot of other activities that staff work on, staff like, Jared Silver and Anna Webb and Story Reed and Chrissy Pettypass, people who are the principals in those areas, Melanie Griffin too, and Nicola. Those staff have other jobs, and so they've had to sort of put on hold some of those other tasks that they normally do. So we're looking forward to this getting behind us to get back to work. But we're really glad that we're able to bring the support to the industry. On another front, there's a new program that just was announced to help seafood processors deal with COVID and allow for some reimbursements of COVID-related expenses, such as personal protection equipment, testing, infrastructure changes. And Massachusetts is eligible for a portion of that. I think it's $1 million. And if Story's on the call, if he could just clarify that. But that's going to be a separate grant program that is going to be probably managed by Maggie again, Maggie Nazarinas, who who has been put on. She's Kevin's assistant, and her primary duty at this point is these grant applications. And she's done a great job. I should probably be the one to handle that one as well. Are there any questions on the CARES Act that I can take at this time? If not, I'll keep moving.
I'm not seeing any questions, Dan.
Okay. All right, the upcoming ASMFC meeting is not going to be in person. This is the second year in a row New Jersey was scheduled to host the annual event, but they opted because of the spike in the Delta variant to keep it virtual. I guess the highlights for this meeting are going to include the striped bass amendment, which is being worked on by the plan development team. It'll be brought forward, I believe, by the board to review before going out to public hearing later this fall and winter. Also, there were some interesting developments in the lobster fishery. I am the lobster board chairman, and this upcoming meeting is my last meeting before I step down as chair. But there's a few things that I think are worth discussing. One is an ASMFC proposal with what we expect to be a federal complementary rule in the months ahead to require of federal permit holders inexpensive cell phone-based vessel trackers. This would create a data collection system comparable to vessel monitoring systems that depict where and when vessels are fishing. This data is already available for so many of our other commercial fisheries, such as groundfish boats and scallop boats and surf clams. But it doesn't exist for the lobster fleet, and primarily because lobster is primarily managed by the ASMFC and not by NOAA, and NOAA and the council, of course, they really haven't made this a priority. But I can tell you from personal experience, between offshore wind development and the future offshore aquaculture projects that we saw one being proposed up off of the Isle of Shoals, off New Hampshire, Mass, and new ones, coming up. The ocean's going to be shared by the fishing industry, and the more that we can help defend the footprint of the lobster fishery, the better off the lobster fishery is going to be. And so we are looking to mandate that data collection within a couple of years. And I think it'd be super, super valuable for folks who want to advocate for the lobster fishery. I'm not sure all the lobstermen will see it that way, but that'll be the next challenge to sell them on the necessity and the value of this. But between whales and wind and aquaculture, it's really hard to defend the lobster fishery's footprint. We saw this in there's a offshore wind development down on Cox's Ledge, which is southwest of Martha's Vineyard and south of Rhode Island, which is one of the most productive, fishing areas around. And that area is going to see a dozen wind turbines plopped right on top of it. And I just wonder if we had data like the kind we'd like to collect in advance of that, if the outcome might have been different. But nonetheless, that's on the horizon. The other thing is there's an addendum that's in the works that talks about future conservation measures for the Georges Bank, Gulf of Maine combined stock. And the addendum that's being worked on is attempting to set up conservation measures that would be triggered if or when there's signs of stock decline. This essentially is already signs of stock decline. And what I mean by that is, Maine's landings have already declined by something in the realm of around 25 million pounds from the high of about 140. I think that's accurate. I know Bob's on the call. And we've already seen some declines in the pre-recruit indices, such as from Inventless trap surveys. No stock can stay at an all-time high forever. And that's what we're seeing with lobsters, is that it was at an all-time high over the last decade. The stock is not considered overfished, and overfishing is not occurring, but there's strong interest to build in some kind of buffer, or I'm afraid to use the word resilience, but that is what's thrown around. But just be ready, because sometimes if if you don't rulemaking takes so long that if you don't have this stuff thought through in advance, you can wind up wasting a lot of time when the stock needs conservation. Things like modest gauge increase in area 1 could come about if the stock is determined to have declined to a trigger level. So the addendum itself is going to define the trigger, and then it's going to define what those actions will be. So you can expect to see that in the next 3 to 6 months. The next issue is there's a new recreational fishing permit system that Story has been working on with Kevin, and also I think some of the other rec program staff like Christine Cassidy. And this is a Department of Fish and Game initiative. Obviously, our inland agency sells even more permits than we do because they have a lot of hunting permits, and hunting permits are more complicated than just the straight up fishing permits. And so there's a new vendor, and we hope to bring a presentation to you at a future meeting once they get closer. This thing is going to be launched by December 1st, and so there's going to be some growing pains for sure. And then there's no shellfish update on the agenda, but I'll report the shellfish program is still dealing with the extraordinary rain event back on September 1st and 2nd. I know in my town here in Sandwich, we had about 7 inches of rain. And the New Bedford area also had a similar amount of rain, if not higher. And some shellfish areas still are closed after almost 3.5 weeks due to contamination. It was really, I don't want to say unprecedented, but it was really extraordinary. But staff are working diligently to reopen those areas. And the last thing I want to talk about is I want to give a brief shout out to Bill Doyle for taking Story and Julia and I on a tour of his shellfish farm. It was really an eye-opening experience for the 3 of us. It's growing oysters is more challenging than any of us ever realized, with the potential for catastrophic loss at every phase of the process, from the seed to the juveniles to the marketable product. And growers like Bill who have intertidal grants, they have to assess what I guess we call the microenvironments to figure out how to successfully grow oysters in exactly that place. The depth of water, the changing tides, the very short time windows when his employees can go out and work on the grant, the threats of winter ice and storms all have to be overcome to work the grant, and making it very challenging for him and his employees to produce those oysters. So my bottom line is I will never question the value of an oyster again. And I really want to thank Bill for that. And it gave all 3 of us an incredible appreciation for the challenges of being an oyster farmer, which I guess it's a labor of love, but it's also a lot of labor. And when I see some of his employees, on their knees sorting through, in waders sorting through the growing oysters and culling them, and also having to do that for very short opportunities. I mean, the day we were out there was beautiful. It was sunny in the 70s, bright blue sky, but we all know that there's plenty of days where it's not any of that, and yet they still have to work. So thank you, Bill, for a great tour. And I think it was really educational for the 3 of us. So Ray, that's all I have. I'll take any questions. I went a little long, but the agenda didn't have some of the issues that I want to talk about today. So.
Questions for the director, please.
Bill Amaru.
Bill, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Very good report, Dan. Very timely topics and covered very nicely. I wanted to mention something I read this past week in the National Fisherman about issues raised. This is concerning a wind farm topic, and issues raised by a group of Rhode Island, Connecticut fishermen who have formed an organization that's registered on their behalf to represent them. And they felt that throughout the last several years of data collection by the organizations that will be putting up the platforms, including the one that you mentioned, a lot of the information that was provided by the industry was simply not used in determining locations of a considerable number of the platforms that will be put up. And there's a sense of a disingenuous attitude on the part of the operators of these farms. and it's not going over well. You had mentioned the Coxes, and that I think was the specific problem that they were having, the Cox's Ledge and surrounding waters. This is a long-term issue. I was on the committee on the council in 1996 and 7 when these first murmurs of the idea of putting platforms that would eliminate commercial fishing from zones. And I remember the committee that I was on was very well, it stated very clearly that there was going to be a great deal of resistance unless the industry was on board for what they were going to do. There's a lot of water out there, a lot of bottom that isn't particularly important to mobile or the trap fisheries. And I really hope that somehow people who are making these choices and decisions will include the comments and act on the information that the industry provides. This is a platform for making that clear. I hope that people will be listening who might be aware of this issue and will continue to move forward to have an equitable and workable program, because without the industry on board, it simply doesn't have as much of a sense of veracity as it could if it were on board for the future.
Mhm.
Those are my comments on that, and there'll be other issues that we'll talk about later in the meeting having to do with fishing and our own waters. Thank you.
Thanks, Bill.
Thank you, Bill. Any other hands raised, Jared?
Leo?
Leo, you're
Yes.
recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Director Mckiernan, for a wonderful report. I especially enjoyed listening to your feelings about Bill Doyle's tour. I've had the opportunity, I haven't taken it up. Bill's offered me a tour there, and I just feel badly I haven't done it. But what I want to get back to the ASMFC meeting, is it possible for the commission to receive a public Zoom meeting link? I'm assuming it's going to be open to the public. And if so, could we get that and also get the agenda as to the various times when the various topics will be spoken on?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we'll make a point of that. As soon as we see the first meeting announcement, we'll make sure you get it. Jared, do you want to take that down as a task?
Done.
Yeah, okay.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, and if I can add lib, Dan, I also heard that we might be having this annual meeting in New Jersey in late January. I presume that would be our winter meeting, but, commission members should know that. So it might be an in-person meeting at the end of January in Jersey. I presume you're going to discuss that tomorrow at the executive committee meeting.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I just wanted to let other commission members know that we might be meeting in person for a February meeting, which would be the end of January. Or that.
Yeah, Ray, the only other thing I would add is, nothing's the same anymore, right? So, post-COVID, pre-COVID. So in the past, ASMFC boards were convened, with expense, in those quarterly meetings. And it was it's a very rare event where they would agree to convene the board for a single issue meeting, but it's happened. I think Menhaden had a very controversial meeting. I know Southern New England Lobster had one. And so what I want to say is that it's possible that some of the meetings could be single issue, could be virtual, and could actually be outside of the quarterly meetings if it's deemed really time sensitive. I bring that to your attention because like this lobster tracking addendum, we're working closely with the National Marine Fisheries Service to make sure that they can do some kind of a parallel rulemaking with us, and we're trying to make sure we don't get ahead of them, but that we bring them along with us, but with an urgency not to let this get pushed so far in the future because of ASMFC's quarterly meeting schedule. So it's possible that we might have a single issue meeting at the ASMFC, but have it virtual, which doesn't cost any money. And so, it's if you can get the board together, that might happen too. So just a heads up that the new reality with these virtual meetings might precipitate that kind of an outcome.
Thank you, Dan. Any other questions for Dan?
Not seeing any further questions, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Jared. Moving along, we're going to try to keep to the agenda, the time frame. 2021 quota managed species updates. I presume Story's going to be giving us this.
Yep, I'll do that along with Anna Webb. Jared, I'll share my screen.
Thank you, Story.
Can you see that?
Yes, thank you.
Great. Okay. All right, so Anna's actually going to kick us off and do the first half of these. I'll do the second half, and we're going to give you an update on where we stand as of today. Actually, with the data, we reran these this morning, and we will plug in some of the details along the way since the last meeting, some of the daily possession limits and open days for some of the species were adjusted based on your last meeting, and quotas have been updated a little bit. So we'll try to highlight those as we go along, and just stop us if you have any questions in between species. So Anna, I'll kick it over to you to start with sea bass.
Thanks. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Great. So I kept the format the same as last time. So you guys should have seen these figures before. So everything is just updated. And on the right-hand figure, we extended it out to the end of October. So you can kind of see how these tail ends of some of these summer seasons typically go and what we might expect for going forward in 2021. For black sea bass, we did add 2 days effective August 30th. October 1st, we'll add the last 2 days, so it'll be a full week. We did see some impacts from both of the hurricanes on landing rates, and Labor Day was low. So you can kind of see some of that decrease in the catch rates in September. But the extra days seem to kind of have maintained that steady weekly rate, even if it's slightly lower, but it's probably higher than it would have been without those 2 extra days. There's been no change in quota for sea bass as of right now. Are there any questions on sea bass?
Not seeing any questions, Anna.
Okay. So for striped bass, we're doing pretty well. We're hit over 90% as of today. But last week was actually fairly high, as was the week before. This is kind of a unique September. We haven't seen rates like that probably since 2017, as you can see on the graph. Actually, that was in August, great. So we haven't seen rates that high in a while. So that's good news for that fishery. The hurricanes did not impact these landings quite as much. They did a little bit, but it seems to have rebounded fairly well into September. So it's this one, we're not really sure what we're going to see in the next couple of weeks, but it could close as early as the end of this week or even next or into next week. Depends on the weather, depends on the open fish, how the weather are on the fishing days. Beginning on October 1st, we will be open 5 days if we make it that far. And the fishery will close on November 15th if the quota has not been reached.
Hey, Anna.
Yeah.
If I could just state the obvious to the commission members. So these quota monitoring pages are a compilation of dealer reported information, doesn't include the fishermen's harvest reports. And the dealers have a weekly deadline of Tuesday to give us the previous Sunday through Saturday's purchases or sales, purchases from the commercial fishermen. And I know that you and your staff look at the data and you try to find any missing dealers, because sometimes a dealer report could be missing and it might give us a smaller than what's actually been landed value. Even if it comes in like a day late, a weekly report like this could be a little bit in error. But I just want the commission to know that this is a project that works with the dealers very closely. Kim Lundy, who's been on our statistics project for a couple of decades now, she works those phones every day and talks to the dealers about what they see, and they know who the highliners are. So they pick up the phone, and if they see one of those missing, they work to make sure that that they get that number into this as hard as they can. So.
And I will add to that hasn't been done this week, given that we ran these at 8:47 this morning. So we're working on that. These official weekly landings will come out later today, but they usually are published on, or at least run on Wednesdays. But with the commission meeting being Wednesday instead of Thursday, I had to run them this morning without that piece. So there could be a few missing reports that bump up landings for, the last week if we're missing anything, but there's nothing major missing as that we can tell right now.
Yeah, well, what doesn't get expressed in these is the location of catch. Obviously, correct. You get the co-location of the landings. So, if a truck that's based in Boston, picks up the fish in, let's say, Sandwich, but the fish was caught east of the Cape, that's not known where the actual catches were until the fishermen's reports come in, and that the fishermen's report is where we get fishing location.
Yeah, and we can say for this fishery, since it is kind of a unique situation, or it's, well, maybe not unique anymore, but the last 2 years, we have seen a dramatic shift northward in the landings. And we can see it this year based on which dealers are primarily purchasing from fishermen. We do know that this northward shift has continued into 2021.
Right, thank you.
Any questions on striped bass?
Not seeing any hands raised, Anna.
Okay, bluefish, we're approaching the quota fairly rapidly in August. So we acquired a 50,000 pound transfer. I believe that was from New Jersey. I could be wrong. And that went through last week. So our quota has increased by 50,000 pounds over the last one that you saw last month. And we are continuing at a pretty steady rate for 2021. Any questions on bluefish?
Khalil?
Yeah, again, getting back to Dan's before about, the location. Any idea where most of these bluefish have been caught?
I have not looked at that, but let me see if I.
And I'm having trouble understanding. I don't know if we're getting muffled. I don't know if the rest of the others are hearing that, but maybe you're too close to your mic. But
the headset in. I don't know what's.
Okay.
It's not dying. I'm not seeing anything stand out in terms of location for bluefish. So I can't say right now what the trend is.
Yeah, I find this graph very interesting, especially the one on the right where you're comparing 2017 to 21. It seems like it's been most prolific this year than in previous years, and I was curious if the biologists at DMF had any thoughts or reasoning behind that.
This is Nicola. There was a quota reduction that has occurred from 2017. So that's what you're seeing, that decrease reflects.
Okay, thanks, Nicola.
Mm-hmm. But that quota decrease was in 2020, correct? Not 18 and 19.
Thank you.
And 2020, bluefish didn't do that well, but so did a lot of other species. So it's kind of hard to use that as a comparison.
Mike,
I have my hand up, but Bill Amaru has his hand up. Could I make a comment?
Bill, I got you next. I have Mike with his hand up first.
Okay.
Don't mind.
Mike Piernock, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Anna. There's been quite a few reports of the recreational for-hire community of bluefish north of Cape Cod, which is positive to hear and see and observe. My question as it pertains to that is I'm not sure the distribution of the commercial fleet and whether most of them are located south of the Cape or around the Cape area. And are there many that are pursue them north of the Cape, since for many years there haven't been many up that neck of the woods, but this year seems to be an exception. So do you have any comment to that?
I can make a quick comment on that. So our permit staff in the Gloucester office has noticed over the past month a real increase in people coming in to get boat or rod and reel permits with the intent of pursuing bluefish commercially. Now, of course, we don't know exactly whether they've acted on that, but they have been coming in to get permits. And that was something that our permit staff hadn't noticed on the North Shore for years. So it's anecdotal at this point. We'll have to look at it, but we have seen renewed interest permitting wise on the North Shore.
And to add a little bit, a lot of our landings come from the bluefish gill netter, and he can fish either side of the Cape based on his permits. But we'd have to look into the into the harvester reports to see what areas he's been harvesting from. So it's kind of that the activity in the fishery is often largely driven by that operation.
Thank you. Just to add to it, me and many others, fishing Buzzards Bay or Vineyard Sound, we've seen a tremendous this past weekend and previous weekend of snapper bluefish, the little guys. So that was positive to see that. So there's a lot of positive things we see on the water as far as bluefish goes, which, considering the status of that stock and what's planned to, with changes to be made to it, it's somewhat inconsistent with our observations. And I just wonder or conclude that are we dealing with environmental factors that are beyond, fishing that are impacting the population? Thank you.
Bill,
I'll add one more thing to that. Unfortunately, we're not going to be able to look at any spatial distribution for 2021, probably until next summer. So unfortunately, that delay is going to prohibit us from answering a lot of these questions right now.
Thank you,
Thank
Ann.
you.
Bill, you're recognized.
Okay, thanks very much, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, I'm not going to speak for that gill netter. I'll only comment that he's very appreciative of the department's ability to secure the additional 50,000 pounds. He's had a very good year. He does fish in the various locations that have been described in the earlier conversation. And knowing the cyclical nature of these animals and hearing that there are a lot of snapper fish around and that there's plenty of food for them, there's still a remarkable amount of mackerel inside waters. Also a complementary school of, I guess we call them false albacore, the small bonitas. These fish, I'm talking about fish that are 6 to 8 inches long. We're seeing a lot of those in the mackerel fishery that I pursue. So overall, I'm looking for a very positive result in the future for bluefish. And the movement to the north certainly comes as no surprise. Everything is moving to the north. We're seeing species that rarely have been sighted. We're seeing them commonly now in our waters. So all bets are off as far as being able to predict what might or might not be around in the future. Only know that there'll be changes made for sure. Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, thank you, Bill. And I would just like to make a correction in terminology and gear type. The gear type you're talking about is a strike net, which is much different than a gill net.
Absolutely. I'm glad you caught that. Thank you, Rick.
Mr. Chair, Mike Mckiernan has his hand raised.
Mike, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to add to Bill's observations and comments, would it be possible for this body to have a presentation in the future concerning the proposed measures for bluefish as well as mackerel? Because there's cuts coming, and the observations or our observations are inconsistent with future actions. So maybe it'd be prudent to have a presentation for all of us to see what's on the books, what's planned, and where that's going. and how that could potentially impact commercial as well as recreational fishery.
I second that.
Nicola, would you like to address what's going on with bluefish with the Mid-Atlantic?
Sure. I think Mike is referencing NOAA's proposed rule, which would implement the Mid-Atlantic Council and ASMFC's joint management plan. That includes a slight shift in the allocation between the commercial and recreational fisheries, just by about, I think it's 3 percentage points shift. It's still predominantly a recreational allocation. And that is based on including more recent years landings in that allocation split. There was also a change in the commercial state-by-state allocations that incorporates more recent landings trends in the states, and that's being phased in over 7 years. So Massachusetts quota will see an increase share over those years. And the other main aspect was the rebuilding plan. The stock was declared overfished last year, or the letter may have been in 2019 based on the recent stock assessment. And so the council is required to implement a rebuilding plan. And that rebuilding plan that was selected will allow for increased catches over a 7-year period to rebuild the stock. So the quota and recreational harvest limit are have been set to increase next year for bluefish.
Thank you, Nicola. Are you happy with that response, Michael?
Mr. Chairman, yes, I'm happy with her description of the status. I'm just disappointed that bluefish and mackerel, in my opinion, are examples of climatic shift with increased numbers in our waters. And the fish are not in the mid-Atlantic like the old days because they've come up here and they're farther north and farther east. But as a result now, there's rebuilding plans and changes to the management of the stocks, which it looks like a climatic shift issue. And it's disappointing for many of us up here that then we have that biomass that's up here and then we may not have access to it as a result of decreases in seasons or bag limits.
Thank you. You'll have to listen into a Mid-Atlantic Council meeting, Mike.
Yes, I may actually be the liaison in the future from the council. So I've been involved in the discussions, but I'm coming into the game a little late. Thank you, Ray.
Thank you, Michael. Any other? Can we move along, Anna?
Dan, you had your hand raised?
Yeah, hey, thanks, Jared and Ray. I guess I have a question for Nicola. Given that this is a relatively fast-growing species, Bob just pointed out to me that this fall's inshore state trawl survey ran into a really high number of snapper bluefish. I guess my question to you, Nicola, is what's your perception on the ability of the management to stay current with the status of the stock? Is there kind of a built-in delay in terms of the timing needed for data collection and stock assessment so that even as a stock recovers for something like this one, which is fast growing and is harvestable probably at age 1 and 2, and marketable. Is that an inherent sort of, I won't say flaw, but inherent weakness in the system in terms of having appropriate measures given the changing stock status with year class strength?
I think that goes beyond bluefish, that there's an inherent delay from the time that a stock assessment occurs, which generally only has data up to the year prior to the stock assessment. And then it takes time for the management response to occur.
Yeah, okay, thanks. I'm good, Ray.
Thank you, Director. Can we move along, Anna? Any other
Not seeing
questions?
any other hands raised, Mr. Chair, so we can go ahead.
Okay, so Fluke. There were some questions last time about participation, so we did look at some general trends. I didn't get a chance to look quite into the detail of gear type and area distributions. That is something that is planned by the end of October. But we did see that between June and August, participation has decreased somewhere between 30 and 50% since 2015. That range is large, but it has to do with how I can filter the data and get an estimate. So somewhere in there. And it's been decreasing regularly since 2016. Additionally, the landing rates have kind of declined steadily in recent years. You can kind of see this on the right-hand side, how the graph kind of tends to tilt to the right a little bit as you go through time. And it seems to be correlated with this decreased participation. What I haven't, part of this larger analysis, we'll be looking at whether or not these the limits are being hit in all these years just by less people, or if it's some combination of not hitting the limits and less participation. We do, like I said, our plan is for a late October summary. Jared, I'm not sure if we intended to present at the October meeting, but more likely the December.
I think the intention was to get together with the, to have a meeting with the fleet during fall to discuss these things, and then depending on the timing of that, probably summarize that meeting, which would involve some of the same material being presented to the commission at the late October meeting. But that's really all depending on timing of the industry meeting with the timing of the October commission meeting.
Right. So, and you can see there really hasn't been a whole lot of change. Even there was limited impacts from the hurricanes, and the rate has remained fairly steady through last week. Are there any questions on fluke?
Hey, Anna, can you speak to why the black line 2021 on June 1st is so substantially higher than the other years?
Yep, we made some regulatory changes for the winter season, starting, I believe, in November of 2020. And that we did hit very close to that 30% mark in January through April. And thus we were much higher than normal going into the summer season this year, as we intended to be.
Yeah.
And that 30% mark is also higher by poundage as a result of quota increases from 2017 to 2021, as described in the memo that we'll deal with under the in-season adjustments. But that quota has increased pretty substantially since 2017.
And Jared, do you want to speak to what those changes were to the winter fishery?
Yes, so the winter fishery previously opened on February 1 with a 500-pound limit. We increased that limit to 2,000 pounds or to 1,000 pounds and opened it on January 1. And then in each of the last 2 years, 2020 and 2021, we took action before the season in response to quota increases to increase that limit from 1,000 pounds to 2,000 pounds. So we've increased the capacity of that fishery by increasing the trip limit effectively from 500 pounds to 2,000 pounds, and also the time of the fishery by adding January to that winter fishery.
Jared, what about the multi-state landing option? Do you want to speak to that?
Sure. So thanks for reminding me of that. Last year, we implemented a program with New York, Rhode Island, and Connecticut that allowed the offshore fishery to, if they're permitted, as that's occurring in federal waters, many of those boats are permitted in multiple states. There's a lot of overlap between the Massachusetts fleet and the Rhode Island fleet. So what the program did was allow a vessel to come in with multiple states limits, provided each state's limit was segregated and marked in an appropriate fashion. They could come into, say, New Bedford, offload their 2,000 pounds of fluke in Massachusetts, then steam over to Point Judith and offload their Rhode Island limits. And if they had a Connecticut permit, presumably they could go to Stonington or some such Connecticut port, and the same for New York. So that allowed them to trip fish and to better access the wintertime quotas for the states which they are permitted. And it kept them from having to choose which state to go to based on landing limits. They could actually land in multiple states, so that allowed each state to better utilize its quota as well. And I'd expect in the next couple weeks, I will begin working with my counterparts in those states again to revamp that program for 2021. And I think I said we initiated it last year. I believe we actually initiated it in 2021. 2019 and renewed it for last year. So this would be the third year that we'd be moving forward with that program. Mr. Chair, I'm seeing a comment, a hand raised from Khalil.
Khalil, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Jared. I'm looking at the chart on the left, and I'm really concerned that we have an action item coming up to raise the poundage, and it looks like this fishery is underperforming for whatever reason, environmental, population numbers, thresholds, or whatever. And I'd like to get a clear understanding or a hypothesis as to why this fishery doesn't even look like it's going to meet the target of quota allowed.
Dan, do you want to get into that now, or do you want to save that for
Khalil, I'd recommend, because that's going to be next on the agenda after we get through with this. We can bring this image up again during that discussion.
Understood. Thank you.
Any other questions, Jared?
Bill Amaru?
Yeah,
Well,
thank you. Since that
recognized.
is the, yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. If that's the case, Jared, maybe I should hold my comment for that portion of the meeting, because it was directly related to the issue that you just asked Khalil if we could talk about it in the next section. So I'll wait until then.
We'll recognize both you and Khalil during that discussion.
Thank you.
Yeah, and as Chair, Jared, I've been, maybe Bill Amaru has been getting a lot of calls. I've been getting a lot of calls from the hook and line gear sector. So maybe I'll bring this up in the action item. But I noticed this graph particular graph shows us otter trawl landings.
No,
This graph is all landings.
Okay, all landings, but it doesn't differentiate between gear types.
So we can't differentiate with bluefish. We can't differentiate things like gear type and area of harvest until we that on that typically follows about 6 months, into the late spring year.
Yeah, you broke up, Jared. I'm not hearing you at all.
Can you hear me now?
yeah,
Okay. We have to audit that information to the fishermen.
yeah. You're breaking up again, Jared.
I can speak to that, if you guys can hear me okay.
Everybody's coming in kind of broken at the moment.
Anna, give it a try. I could hear you.
Okay. Yeah, so for current year analyses, we cannot look at gear type and area harvested until as that relies on the harvester data, which is a much larger delay than these dealer data. And so generally, we can't look at that until the summer of the following year. So we can review anything previous to 2021 at this point, but not the 2021 itself.
And we do intend to do that at least through 2020
Correct.
for this analysis we're talking about doing for later in October.
Correct. And that would look at, participation, shifting areas,
Right.
gear, and splitting it by gear type.
Thank you, Anna. Okay, let's move this along.
We have one more comment from Mike Peardnock.
Michael?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll be brief. Quick point of clarification. So if a mid-Atlantic commercial vessel comes up here, gets their catch, and they go back to their port, is that reflected on the state they caught it in, or since it was in Massachusetts waters or federal waters nearby, is it reflected on?
Yeah, Mike, we only control the possession limit in state waters. Now, there are no federal trip limits. So if a boat from the mid-Atlantic is coming from a state with a much higher trip limit, they can't violate our trip limit. They can't possess more than 400 pounds in state waters,
Right.
but they could be just over the line, let's say southeast of Nantucket, and have more than that. And then when they steam back to their state, it is what it is. It wouldn't reflect anything about Massachusetts.
So do you think that these reductions over time that are being observed, are they a result of those vessels no longer landing them in New Bedford and taking them and offloading them in New Bedford, or and the fact that they're taking them back to their state and it's reflected in their quota for that state?
And if I may, I think that we have historically had fairly low trip limits compared to those mid-Atlantic states. And that if a vessel's coming up here, they're going to fish under the higher trip limit and not fish under the lower summertime trip limits and land in Massachusetts. I think the low slope in the line that you're seeing from June to present on that 2021 graph is reflective of the changes in the inshore fishery, which we'll get into in the next action item.
Okay, thank you, Jared.
Just to clarify, quotas are assigned, or landings are assigned to the state in which catches are assigned to the state in which they are landed or offloaded, regardless of where it came from.
Yeah, I think the word landed trips us up in every conversation. You know, brought to shore is what we mean by landed. You know, when a boat lands a tuna, or a fisherman lands a tuna, it means he got it on the boat. But then he lands the tuna in the port. So I think the word land often confuses people. So it has to do with where the fish are sold, which port they're brought into.
Just with that, I don't know if there's one other observation, if you can provide your opinion or even have a sense if it's the case, is that if these vessels are right off of Nantucket, right off of state waters and federal waters, and pounding it and catching a lot of summer flounder and bringing it back to the mid-Atlantic, then that's going to ultimately be less fish that are going to come into state waters. Observations that I've heard from the fleet is that they saw quite a bit of that this year, and it's impacted the 10 plus pounders that many would target, recreationally or for hire. So is there any way for that to be controlled? And do we think that having less fish available to the commercial fleet to land it is a result of that commercial effort right beyond the state line?
I think you're stealing the debate from the next item. I think this is what we need to talk about in the next action item.
All right. Thank
Yeah,
you.
if you just park that, I'm sure we'll get to that.
Okay,
Yeah,
thank you, Dan.
I would like to move forward here, Anna and Story, because this action item was supposed to start occurring at 10 a.m. and we're still reviewing different species. So can we move this along?
Let's move on to horseshoe crab, and we'll go through the last four pretty quickly. So horseshoe crab, a couple things to point out here. At your August meeting, I think we were still working on getting some delinquent dealers to report for June and July. So those dealers have reported, and you see a more complete picture, especially up until about a week or so ago. This is one of those species where when we ran this morning and I looked at some of the compliance, is a few dealers straggling over the past few weeks that need to get their or past week and a half or so that need to get some landings in. So I'm sure Kim will work with them today. So up until that little drop off there, this data is pretty complete. You might see a few more landings coming in where it looks like it's tailed off there over the past week and a half. I don't know if that's real yet. There was an increase in the dragger limit, you'll remember, based on a letter of authorization right around August 1st. And you can see a slight uptick there in the landings rates around August 1st. So that does show up here. So, this is still tracking nicely as the inshore trawl fishery continues this fall. and we're at 85% landed or so, and continuing to move up. Without any questions, I'll just move on to the next slides. Tatag landings, the Tatag Fishery just opened on September 1st, about 3 weeks ago. So we're just starting to get a look at the landings that have been reported over the past few weeks. Historically, it starts off pretty slowly, and we seem to be right in that same trajectory. If you look at the graph on the right, we are seeing some indication that the catch rates are starting to tick up a little this week. One point here, this is the second year of our limited entry endorsement scheme for Tatag, as well as the second year for the Tatag tagging program. I just wanted to point out that in year 2, the tagging program is going smoother, and that the distribution this year was based on the activity of this limited group from year 1. So instead of looking at that group like we did last year, but also there were other fishermen that were fishing in 2019 that didn't make the cut. We had that. We knew who the pool was. They were the only ones commercially fishing last year for Tatag. So we were able to allocate their initial tag allocation for this year based on last year. That seems to have gone really smoothly so far. We're having less fishermen knocking on the door in New Bedford looking for more tags very early in the season, because those who were active last year got a decent allocation based on what they did last year. So that seems to be working well, and we'll keep monitoring that, but it's less of a scramble for us than it was last year. So that's good for our staff and the fishermen, for that matter. They got a more accurate allocation of tags. Okay, SCUP, there's not a whole lot to say here. This is similar to past years where we have relatively low landings as compared to our quota. We did transfer out 200,000 pounds to another state earlier in the season because obviously we have plenty. So this is very similar to previous years at this point. And then we'll wrap it up with spiny dogfish, which over the past 2 to 3 years, this has kind of been the story. Lower landings, lower catch rates and participation. It all seems to have gone down over the past 2 to 3 years for a variety of reasons. We're hearing fish farther offshore. The economics of it aren't there. Some fishermen who are able or are targeting other species. So this is where we stand now in terms of the utilization, and this is that 17 million pounds quota is the northern states quota, I believe.
And Story, I'd add that there's a 6,000 pound trip limit, which is a federal and interstate plan feature for those states in the northern region. That doesn't include the states, New York, South, where they have their own quota. So I think there is some conversation among the participants at a recent monitoring committee meeting for the need to increase that, especially if the distribution of dogfish is shifting offshore. You really can't make a day's pay fishing on inexpensive dogfish. I don't know, is the ex-vessel price around 20 cents or 21 cents? And it just, you need more fish in order to motivate people to go catch that quantity of fish in order to be profitable.
Yeah, and also Dan and other commission members should know the pandemic has affected the dog fishery in the sense that last year the processors filled their freezers. And this year, I know one of the 2 processors that buys in Chatham, he's got a certain number of boats. He won't take on any new boats, and he's only accepting dogfish so many days per week. So they're mandating days off. So, when you talk about lack of interest on behalf of the harvester, you know, when your buyer tells you, hey, we only want you to fish 4 or 5 days of the week. Whereas in the past, they let them go 7 days a week, and then they told them, well, no more fishing on Friday or Saturday because, you know, the processing plants weren't open till Monday. So that's also.
Yeah. Those are good insights, Ray. Thank you for that.
Story.
That's all we've got for a quota update. Unless there's any other questions.
I have 2 questions. Khalil?
Khalil, you're recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Story, interesting comments on this. Is there a right-hand graph to compare 17 to 21?
Yeah, I don't believe we have that here, but we could provide that for you.
Again, it's one of these things, and I know that I didn't bring it up in the SCUP discussion. I'm really concerned about, we have a 100% quota of about 17 million pounds, I'm thinking it is. And again, we have a species down here that is, again, looks like it's underperforming. And I think we really, as a commission or as a marine fishery, we need to talk about more closely as to why this is happening. And you know, I'm sad to say that, you know, we have a quota, but yet we're less than 500,000 pounds at this point, and it looks like we're going to try to get to 500,000 pounds where we have a 17 million pounds. So I think it's something we need to pay attention to. Thank you.
Story for dogfish.
This
This is a regional
yeah.
quota,
That's right.
correct?
This is a regional quota.
That 17 million is a regional quota, although Massachusetts typically takes the majority of it. So just something to consider.
Thank
Bill
you.
Amaru?
Hand up, Jared.
Bill Amaru.
William, you're recognized. William?
Bill, you're muted.
Sorry about that. Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Okay, so this is a species that's not underperforming. It's a fishery that's underperforming. And as far as Chatham is concerned, the difficulties that they're having conducting the fishery in the area are getting to the point now where there's a lot of discouragement within the fleet. And I know that there are going to be people going out of business or leaving the industry. It's simply too hard to make a living trying to chase down dogfish that seem to be getting further and further away, competing with sharks that are chewing up the guy's gear because the number of sharks that live in and around the Chatham waters now is tremendous. They're getting bitten off virtually every set they make. It's a real serious problem and a fishery that needs to be reassessed along with a couple of others. The things are changing so dramatically and so quickly. We're not keeping up with it simply by going over numbers that indicate we're underperforming in our efforts to get our quotas met. This is a good example. So was Fluke and a number of others. But for my own purposes, and Ray touched on it, he hit it pretty close. Guys are going further out, fishing harder, getting less money for their efforts. And there's simply no groundfish anymore in the Chatham area to work on. So that's taken away the traditional cod, haddock, pollock fishery. It's getting really tough. I'm amazed myself that the guys are even hanging in as long as they are on some of this stuff. And those are my comments.
Thank you.
I hate to sound gloom and doom all the time on this stuff, but if you're out there with these guys every day and you see what's going on, it's hard not to be.
Mike Peardnock?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Unfortunately, I will add to the doom and gloom. We're observing the same recreationally and for hire, and they destroy our, hook and line equipment the minute we, run into them. I wish there was a way for there to be a market to harvest every damn one of them. I believe, wasn't it Dave Pierce that did his PhD on the fact that these critters eat juvenile cod? And could that be contributing to the decline that we have in cod in either the Gulf of Maine or Georges Bank? So I'm all for increase the quota, harvest them, but if there's no market, then it's not going to make economic sense to do it. And they're a nuisance. They're a nuisance for us. They eat your bait, they eat everything. So I wish there was an answer, but I just wanted to add that observation. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Story? It's
We
back
have
to you.
one more question from Khalil, Mr. Chair.
Khalil, you're recognized.
Thank you, and I'll keep it brief. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's interesting that in 2017, spiny dogfish ranked number 31 on the value list in the state at $9.5 million. And it looks like, pounds, excuse me, at one point, they're almost $2 million. And it looks like for whatever the reason, we're not going to be reaching that anywhere near that level this year. And I have to agree with what Mike said. One of the laws of ecology is everything is connected to everything else. And so nothing is operating in a vacuum, especially out in the ocean. And I think we need to keep that in mind. And I appreciate what Mike had to say regarding his comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Khalil. Story, back to you.
Okay, that's all we've got. And we can keep that fluke slide available for the next discussion if you need it.
Yeah, please do. We're going to take a 10-minute break. A lot of us have been sitting at our desks since 8:45, so I'm calling for a 10-minute break. Let's be back at 10:26. Thank you very much. All back at your computer monitors. We're going to move on to action items. The first one is an in-season adjustment to the 2021 period 2 fluke limits.
Okay, Ray, I'll take this with some lifelines there from staff. So we've already talked about some of these issues tangentially here, but we're going to get into this in some more detail. But I will admit that there are some answers to questions that we don't have right now. But what we're facing is a situation where about half of our commercial quota is uncaught. And I have to admit that this was a kind of the shining, one of our shining accomplishments going back 25 years. We developed this inshore fishery where the dayboat draggers, went from squid in the spring to fluke in the summer, and then maybe a little groundfish in the fall, and they all did pretty well. But over time, there's attrition in this fleet, and our regulations really reflect, in many ways, the will of the agency, but also the commission going back into the 90s and early 2000s. Some of our commission members at the time were adamant, maybe we should be giving all the quota to the summer fishery and none to the winter fishery. But we've had a 30-70 split offshore, inshore. We never had any problem reaching the quota, especially in the low quota years. So now we're faced with a situation where we've successfully argued that because there's more fluke to the east and to the north, and Nicholas given us many accounts of the various iterations that resulted in our quotas increasing, that we have a much larger quota than we have before, but our limits were somewhat stagnant. But in addition, there appears to be other factors in play. And again, we do intend to research these over the next few months. There's far less participation among the active fleet. And again, this was primarily a dayboat fleet. Of course, we don't allow night trawling, so they have to be dayboats. We really did all we could to favor these small owner-operated trawlers. Most of them, because of the regulations, went to a single-handed situation with no sternman. So you have sternmen, probably not the safest way to manage a fishery. But this year, kind of the bottom fell out. From what we've heard, many vessels, many fishermen opted not to fish down south. We keep hearing about exorbitant prices charged by the town of Barnstable in Hyannis, which I've heard reports of up to $18,000 for the year you have to pay to tie up there, even just seasonally. You've got that challenge. You've got a lot of filamentous algae that clogs the net, makes it very difficult to fish. You have fewer fish. We've heard this summer that there was abundant fluke just to the east of the Isle of Chatham, Nantucket, much better fishing, much higher catch rates than close to home. When you're only allowed 400 pounds, it kind of keeps you close to home. And I would reference the analogy, or by analogy, I'd reference that discussion we just had on dogfish. The dogfish limit is at 6,000 pounds because that was the will of the very influential day boat fishermen who could find sufficient catch close to shore within a short steam of Chatham and other small ports. 6,000 pounds really favored them, and the processors didn't want to see excessive amounts of catch that they couldn't handle. So combination of what was good for that day boat fleet and what was good for the processors, we keep that trip limit low. Now that the fish have moved out, are no longer readily available close to shore, the trip limits really don't work as well. And I would point out that one of our objectives is to have the fishery sort of get extended, make the seafood product available, seasonally, not have a boom and bust quota situation. And so catch per day times days fished gives you daily landings. And when the catch per day goes down, and then the number of trips goes down for all the reasons I just mentioned, now we're in a situation where we're bringing in far less than we have in the past, and we have more quota. So at this point, I don't think this is necessarily a stock underperforming. It's performing differently. We know that the fish, or we believe the fish are available in the adjacent federal waters. And what's interesting about this fish is that there is no federal trip limit, unlike so many of the other species that are managed, at the federal level. Fluke was allocated to states, and states were allowed or expected to create seasonal trip limits that affected not just their state fleet, but the federal fleet as well. So by virtue of these trip limits, we're telling the fleet, or we're dictating the economics for the fleet. So if a boat, it's a larger boat with multiple crew, and doesn't have a state waters permit, for example, because it's in excess of 72 feet, there's no way that they're going to be able to target a fluke at a 400-pound trip limit. And so now we have a seafood availability issue here that I think is appropriate, especially as the season comes to a close for our inshore fleet and our recreational fishery. I believe it's appropriate to increase the trip limit, and I'm proposing a doubling of the trip limit from 400 to 800 pounds per day. And then after the recreational season is closed, just go to 7 days a week as well, and hope that this gives our fleet and our shoreside dealer or buyers and processors some competitive opportunity to obtain fish, for the interstate markets. And this memo, talks about a lot of those issues. We've seen a doubling of the quota in the last few years. We used to have up to 30 boats, landing fish in this fishery. We're down to maybe a third of that now. And what I hope to do is I hope to work with staff and go back and look at the fleet in the past and see like how many boats were fishing and who were those boats and what has happened to them. Because ultimately, we write rules and people make independent business plans. They set up their businesses to catch fish while conforming with our rules. But if those businesses are failing or those businesses are opting to do something else, I think it's up to us to figure that out. And I am interested in doing that. I know we've talked to some individual vessel owners who some of these dragomen are lobstering this summer because of the high price of lobsters. Some of them are scalloping. Some of them are catching mussels. There's just a lot of other things they're doing, and they're not fluke fishing. So I just want to take a look at that and sort of get some feedback from those participants. What's their forecast of participation, to figure out if maybe we need to shift our management strategy, away from sort of favoring this small day boat, small trip limit arrangement. If there's no interest in maintaining this fishery for that that class of vessel. Let's be open-minded about that. But nonetheless, as fish move offshore, as the more industrial fleet that fishes out of New Bedford is fishing alongside boats from other states, we'd like to see that fish come into our port, the Massachusetts ports, and be available to our processors. So I'd like the commission to approve a doubling of the trip limit and effective October 10th, a elimination of the closed fishing days. I'm sorry.
Yeah, the proposal is to eliminate closed fishing days on
Yes,
September 26th as well, and then
That's right.
go
And
up to
then-
2,000 pounds for the rest of the year on October 10th.
All right, I stand corrected. So it's a liberalization of these rules. It is more liberal than what went out to public comment. But I think we got sufficient comment among some of the fishery participants to support this kind of an increase. And again, if we reach the quota, we're done, success. I mean, I don't think this is not a situation where the stock is at risk necessarily. This is an allocation among the fleet and among the states. And I don't think I want to see on our watch us constraining our fleet with an underperforming commercial quota. So there's a lot to talk about. I know, Bill, you had some questions. I know Khalil had questions. A lot of it is covered in the memo. I don't want to just repeat the contents of the memo, but why don't we get into questions from the commission and then take a motion to either accept it or to reject my motion or my recommendation.
Okay, commission members, we're gonna open this up to discussion before we even put the motion on the floor. Dan might want to change the motion. So let's have an open discussion about this before we make a motion. And
Bill Amaru.
William, you're recognized. Hello,
Bill, you
Bill.
have to unmute yourself. You're muted.
I don't know why I can't remember to do that. All right. Dan, you've done an excellent job as usual characterizing your explanations on the recommendations. I agree with most of them. I just want you to be aware of the fact that when you go to a 2,000 pound trip limit, and I know you mentioned this a second ago, it's going to incentivize the larger boats to target these fish, and you're going to have a surge of landings that are going to come in, and it's going to close down the season rather quickly at 2,000 pounds. The fish are there. I had a conversation with Phil Michaud this morning. The commission, I hope, has received his letter that was sent a couple of days ago and read it. He makes some excellent points. I'm going to say something about this that I think is necessary, in that this fishery cries out for a new management system. This is not the fishery of the 1980s and 90s where we were rebuilding and struggling along with a 300 pound a day limit that took us 6 or 7 tows to get. According to what I'm hearing right now from the boats fishing in Nantucket Sound, they're getting their fish at 400 pounds in a single tow, if they're in the right place, 2 tows at the most. Now that's just a seasonal reaction to the fish grouping up, I assume, in the areas, and they know where to target them. The weed is less later in the summer. They can fish the way they want to fish, and they're getting the fish. They need to have an increase in the trip limit, which you've addressed, and I applaud that. I just want you to be aware that at 2,000 pounds, you're going to have a completely industrialized aspect to the fishery for the final period, and that may not be a bad thing. I want to see the quota reached. I want to see the fishermen benefit from it. I just don't want to see the fishery change because we I can't pronounce the word, create an incentive for larger boats to start entering into this fishery, because with the small boat fishery that we have currently at between a 40 and 50% decline in its historical numbers, it could be, even though we have the limit on the largest size vessels, a 72-foot vessel is a powerful fishing machine. So there's that to be considered, but I'm going to go back and end up by saying that I believe that this fishery is in need of a complete overhaul of its management strategy. And I think that the meeting that you're planning for the fluke industry to come out and speak is the right place to gather information to start that process. Those are my major comments, and I'll shut down so that other people can speak. Thank you.
Thank you,
Bill, do you have any particular comments on the 3 parts of the motion to eliminate the closed fishing days as of the 26th,
No,
increase
I'm
to
in-
800, and then on October 10th to go to 2,000? Do you have any?
Yeah, well,
particular-
specifically I think the 2,000, even though I'm in favor of all of them, I'm in favor of the concept, and I would vote in favor. I do think, though, that you've got to remember, if you keep that 2,000 pound for the end of the year, you're going to be creating a new fishery. And I think that the boats down the road will expect to see something like that again. It's going to change the nature of the inshore Massachusetts state waters cap fishery. You're going to incentivize those boats. Permits will probably come out of the woodwork that currently aren't fishing. And I know what would interest me. If I were a younger man and I had a 60, 65 foot boat, that's enough fish to fish in the sound and make a good day's pay. Otherwise,
Bill,
they'd be
if I
outside
could follow
ground
up,
fishing.
Bill,
Yep.
if I could follow up, among the staff, we propose this because we're thinking that the fluke aren't going to be found in state waters to in any quantity after, during the fall. And our perception was by the middle of October, those fish have moved out. Do you have a different view of that?
Yes, I do, Dion. I'm so much involved in the temperature changes that are going on, in the fish that I'm seeing in waters that I never saw before. I think October is going to be the new September. I don't see that there's going to be an enormous shift in temperatures. In fact, I'm looking at the 30-day forecast for right now. We're going to be talking about 70s all next week. And God only knows what might happen in October. We might be looking at extremely warm weather, and if the water's not going to chill down, the fish are already here. There's plenty of bait. I think we have to be open-minded. You mentioned open-minded a little while ago, and that goes for what we might expect to see with the changing conditions. I'm in favor of this. I don't have a problem with it. I just want you to be aware that you're going to have unintended consequences from going to 2,000 pounds.
Well, Bill, if listening to what you're saying, would you recommend that we wait till November 1st to go to 2,000 pounds when almost invariably the fish won't be in state waters? At least by historical.
Yeah, I think if you wanted to be, what is the term they use? A cautious approach.
Precautionary?
Yes, a precautionary approach. I think that's probably the right thing to consider.
Yeah.
At least for this year, and then analyze how it looks and go from there. But as I say, this falls under the idea of a reorganized management for summer flounder. I think we're still stuck where we were in the 1980s and 90s.
Yeah.
And now we've got a doubling of our quota. We've got a much smaller fleet. You need to get younger men out on the water, give them a reason to get out there, get the fishery back on its feet again, and have it be managed in a way that will have a long-term benefit.
Okay.
Certainly, harvesting a half to 2/3 of our quota isn't in our best interest.
So would you make that recommendation at this point, or do you want more discussion with some of the other
Oh,
members?
I think there has to be more discussion. I'm just
All right.
one member.
But feel
absolutely.
free to get ready to make that if that's where this goes.
Okay.
Looking for that kind of feedback.
Next hand, Jared.
Leo?
Leo, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I agree wholeheartedly with what Bill just, Commission Member Bill Amaro just stated. I have a little bit of an issue with the going immediately at the time that you have set for the 2,000 pounds. I understand that, when I read your memo, and I read it a couple of times under the public comment part, that good part of your decision making was from Red's Best, the principal buyer, and that necessary to maximize the value. The value of this fish in 2017. I'm going to go back to, since we started a graph before at 2017 with the others. Back in 2017, the value of flounder was $1.9 million, and with a landing of 420,000 pounds. So that's not a great deal of money, not a great deal of poundage. I'm a little concerned also, and we have a season for the recreational anglers from May 22nd to September 30th at 16.5 inches, 5 fish. And their season has now ended. They're not allowed to fish anymore. And yeah, now we're given a fleet, and I understand there's less effort going on because of the, what's happening in Barnstable and with dockage and all that. But I do think we really need to pay attention to the fishery. I would be more comfortable amending the 2,000 pounds to 1,000 pounds and maybe starting it at November 1st rather than almost immediately as you're being asked for. So I agree with what Bill had to say, and I just think that we need to start looking at this and develop a management plan for this fishery in greater detail for the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Khalil. Another hand, Jared?
Mike Bearnock.
Michael, you're recognized.
Hey, Mike, before you go, can we just clarify something for Khalil? November 1st, the limit is scheduled to go to 1,000. So that wouldn't be part of any motion because that's the existing rule. So the three-part motion all represent something different than what's in effect or what's going to be in effect. So just so the commission knows, the current rule has a November 1st, 7-day-a-week, 1,000 pound on that.
Yeah, yes, Director, I understand that because you had that in a footnote number 2 on page number 2. So, but I appreciate you clearing that for everybody else also.
Mike Bearnock, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm pleased when the observations that Bill has with the location of summer flounder is consistent with what I've seen, what the recreational community has seen. If you're in Nantucket or in that area, things are good. If you're in Buzzards Bay and Vineyard Sound, the summer flounder fishery isn't what it used to be. And, all of us suspect it's from increased temperatures. It's driving them farther offshore. I do want to note that Khalil, the summer flounder season ends October 9th, not the end of September. I suspect that's why one of these, item number 3, has an increased trip limit of 10,000 pounds on October 10th. But for the recreational season, it's October 9th. Recreationally, if you're one that fishes from the shore, good luck. They're not here. If you're one that has a boat that can't go farther offshore for safety reasons, the fish just aren't here. You have to have a larger vessel that for safety reasons, you can go into deeper water, 100 plus feet to target them, unless you're in Nantucket, which they're having a great year. But the only thing I've heard in Nantucket is that there's complaints there that those individuals that target the 10 plus pound summer flounder, they're just fewer in numbers, and that we suspect that's from those that were being caught in federal waters. It's apparent, as you said, Dan, that they're being caught out there, and then it provides less opportunities, not only for the commercial fleet in state waters to catch them, but also recreationally. And we've seen the downward trend in landings and where you can get them as a result of that, and as a result of increased temperatures and driving them farther offshore. So I have to agree with Bill that not only summer flounder, there's a few other species we can discuss at another time that it may be the time to change the way they're managed, because it has to take into account climatic shift. So for those in the recreational community, you know that they're disturbed by the fact that you're going to implement these measures while they're still able to fish until October 9th. I mean, my recommendation would be to hold that off till then, but my gut tells me it's not going to matter. The fish just aren't there unless they target the Nantucket waters. But then that would be to the detriment of others, because I think, just to clarify for everybody on the call, I believe that 14 inches is the summer flounder size limit for a commercial fleet. 17 inches is for recreationally. And, that's where I've said in the past, it's almost like you'd have to catch 20 to 30 14-inch summer flounder. You finally catch a 17-inch one in Vineyard Sound, as the season goes on. But My recommendation would be to hold off on these measures till October 10th. But, as far as what Bill said about the trip limit, I'd be happy to hear from others of what their position of that is, because I almost get the sense that this is being managed to the detriment of the inshore commercial fleet. Unless something's done, they're just going to disappear totally for economic reasons. And none of us want that to happen. Thank you.
Hands, Jared,
Khalil?
Khalil, one more bite at the apple.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Michael, thank you so much. I stand corrected on the figures I gave you for the recreational fishermen. What I did is I this morning, preparing for the meeting today, I went to the DMF website and looked up the regulations for black sea bass, scup, and fluke. And I didn't read it carefully, because in the website today, it says 2012 recreational regulations for black sea bass, scup, and fluke. Shame on me for not seeing that. But Michael, you gave the correct figures. The fact of the matter is, the recreational anglers do have, regardless of my incorrect date or the current date, they do have a limit, a season to when they're able to fish. And the inshore fishery has become diminished. It's right here on page 4 of the memo. In recent years, due to a multitude of complex economic, social, and environmental reasons. So there's a variety of reasons for this. So regardless of when the recreational fishery closes, that's a moot issue right now. But I think what is not a moot issue is that we need to find out exactly, as best we can, why there is a diminished, the fishery has become diminished in years. And so I would still like to go back to the status quo for 1,000 pounds rather than the 2, if it comes to a vote. Thank you.
Any other hands, Jared?
Clarification from Khalil, 1,000 pounds on November 1st and not 1,000 pounds on October 10th?
Correct.
Okay.
Khalil, yes, there's a question for Mike here. Now, Khalil, can you forward me the website that you were looking at that had that 2012 information? Because we need to work to remove that, if that's still up there.
I will. It was. I just went to Division of Marine Fisheries, and it's the very first link on the that showed up. The first one, which is usually the most prominent one, and I went down to regulations, and there it was.
Okay, I'm gonna have to look into that because that's a remnant issue.
Okay.
Thank you for bringing that to our attention, though. Mr. Chair, Mike Piernock has his hand.
Michael, last bite at the apple.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And it's a Macintosh apple. I just need to respond. I mean, the fishery has changed over time. And back in the day, Mass DMF did a great job of being able to manage the commercial fishery in state waters to coexist with the recreational fishery. And we were able to use that as an example of how it can work and work for both. But as a result of the climatic shift and the issues that we have that have nothing to do with fishing, but environmental factors, the fish get pushed off farther offshore, and then there's less fish available for the commercial fleet in state waters or recreationally. And if you're a shoreside angler, forget it. They're not there. And I explained earlier how other participants in the recreational community don't have a chance. So with that, it's like a bathtub. Now we're in the Nantucket Shoals or Nantucket Sound in a small area, and the fish are being removed. And now you're going to increase removal by the commercial fleet, which is permitted, and there's going to be less fish available recreationally. I just hope that that doesn't result in less fish that are keeper size, because we have this 14-inch threshold for the commercial fleet and 17-inch threshold for the recreational. Because we've seen that how that's diminished in Buzzards Bay and Vineyard Sound, and that there's few fish of 17-inch or recreational size that are there to be landed. So, ultimately, I would prefer, once again, as a result of that, that October 10th, that these measures be implemented, and the commercial fleet then has the rest of the season to target those fish. I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Any other hands, Jared?
Bill Amaru.
William, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to ask the director if he would consider eliminating number 3 from the recommended motion and keep number 1 and keep number 2. The 800 pounds is going to relieve the inshore mobile gear sector and anyone else who can catch that many fish from financial distress. It's going to open up an opportunity. The 2,000 pounds, I think, is going in the wrong direction, although it could be utilized at a later date in a different seasonality. But for where we are right now and what we should be doing to help fishery at the end here, I believe 1 and 2 are effective to do that.
Yeah, Bill, I certainly would. I guess one of the concerns that I have is if the purpose of this action is to improve the total landings of fluke in Massachusetts before December 31st, I think we have some history with that 2,000 pound trip limit. And Jared, you might have some insights about what we did last year.
Yeah, last year we went to 2,000 pounds on November 1. November 1 is also when the ocean fisheries for Virginia and North Carolina reopen and add large trip limits, usually in the 20,000 pound range. And the price tanks generally, and that results in fewer vessels targeting it. So when we did do that last year, we did not see much of a bump in landings during that November to December time period on account of that. And that was part of the reason why Red's Best was advocating for us to implement that 2,000 pound increase as soon as possible, because that will allow for there to be a higher ex-vessel value associated with those landings at a period of time when those fish are still accessible off the Massachusetts coastline and before the larger trip limit fisheries to our south open. So that was the purpose of that. So there was a designed idea to take whatever quota is left, whether that's 40% or so, by mid-October and try to access that to the greatest extent possible before those mid-Atlantic fisheries open. So that was sort of the thinking there.
That makes sense. I understand that. Dan, it's your call.
Yeah.
I don't know what to tell you on that. I appreciate Red's Best. I know Jared's condition and he does a lot to help the fleet. He's one of the few guys that's hanging in there with us on a lot of these things. So if it benefits his business, that benefits the commercial fishing industry. And if there's a possibility that there can be some benefit to the 2,000 pounds without anything going awry, which is always what I say, I wonder about the unintended consequences. That's what you get paid for, making those kinds of calls. I've said what I needed to say, what I wanted to say. I think that the fishermen are going to be well served either way by this. And I, again, will focus on the belief that we need to reassess this fishery and its management strategy. And I'm glad to hear that the numerous other members feel the same way. And I'm going to say that the meeting that you're planning with the fluke fishing industry members, all the ones who can attend and all the gear classes should be there to be represented. We go forward from there.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, why don't we do this? Why don't we, if someone on the commission would make a motion to propose this as presented, if it fails, I'll come back with a modification to that October 10th, 2,000 pound piece of the proposal.
Yeah, before we go to motions, Dan, I would like to make comment on this. I'm happy under number 2, all gear types, so you're inclusive of the rod and reel, because I've been getting calls from the commercial rod and reel sector. You give us so little, we're catching our daily trip limit in 5 hours time. Whereas I know with the otter trawl fleet, we've given them the rights to fish overnight when when they so choose, when they're fishing down around Nantucket. So there is another gear type, and that's why percentage-wise, they haven't got near the landings of the otter trawl fleet. But a lot of these are good fishermen, and we all know about the biomass of striped bass, the fish they used to be very proficient killing has moved to the North Shore. So they dedicated themselves to the fluke fishery, and they would like to see daily trip limit increases. So I'm right on board with Bill Amaru. I believe this FMP's got to be revisited by your staff this coming winter. I hear a lot from the recreational too, but I think that's goes back to ASMFC. Nicola can correct me on that. But I would like to see the hook and line guys, along with the otter trawl summer limits, increased on a daily basis, like reading Phil Machad's letter. And he called me a while back about this, and I said, please submit a letter, you know, and if we could go back or go over the course of the winter and get these gentlemen together in October or whenever this meeting is going to take place and increase the daily trip limit in the summertime for the commercial fishermen.
Mhm.
So I'll close with that. Thank you.
Mr.
Okay.
Chair, Mike Pearnock has his hand raised. Would you like to take that last comment and then move for a motion?
Michael, are you going to make a motion or is it another comment?
Chairman, it's just a comment, quick comment or
Yeah.
question. Dan, could you just respond? I've thrown out into the floor here a potential for an opening after the recreational fisheries close October 9th to open things up October 10th. I'm just curious, what's your position on that?
On number 1 and 2 of the September 26th, the closed fishing days and the
Right, 'cause
doubling
I've
the trip
thrown-
limit on the
Right, I've
26th.
asked that be moved to October 10th for the reasons that were previously stated.
Yeah,
Thank
I
you.
mean, Mike, I would prefer to keep, I'm going to propose to go forward as proposed, and here's the reason why. The participation in this fleet is so far off because of the reasons that we've talked about, the expensive dockage fees, the attractiveness of some of the other species. I think there may be 6 boats. I mean, if you saw that last trip or the quota monitoring page, you saw the daily average was something like 1,500 pounds. For the 400-pound trip limit, you know, you're talking about, well, there are some days you can't fish, but I don't think we have more than 10 boats fishing in this. And so I would, you know, I would prefer to see twice that many boats and maybe keep the trip limit the same. I think given the lack of participation, I just think that the presence of those vessels, you know, is so much lower now. I still think that it makes sense to increase this. I think if we look back on this on January 1st and we see us only using 60% of the quota, you know, people are going to start questioning what we're doing, because ultimately, you know, the quotas that go underutilized, there's a track record for government agencies to take those quotas and reallocate them. I mean, you know, you don't want it to be the case, but sometimes you get outvoted by the majority, and next thing you know, it is what it is. And so I'm really uptight about Massachusetts not working to fully utilize these quotas. So I prefer to keep this September 26th. As Bill Amaru just said, he talked to guys who said they're getting their limit now in state waters, and the weed is less, and they're getting it, you know, by noon, and it's just not an efficient way to run these fisheries. And you know, that is the problem. We need to look at creating a set of rules that comes close to utilizing these quotas, but also creates profitable business ventures. And I think this 400-pound trip limit is designed for, like, you know, the boats that used to fish single-handed, and you know, guys have left the fishery, and there isn't a lot of interest in younger guys getting into this fishery because the trip limits are so low that the profits out there. So that's sort of a crisis of our construct of the sort of the socioeconomic aspects of this fishery. that's a long answer to say, I want to maintain this recommendation. I don't believe that the recreational fishery is that active by the end of September. I mean, the number of weather days they can get out is diminished. The attractiveness of tuna and striped bass in the fall are probably far greater than fluke at this time of year. I don't mean to second guess someone's business plan, but I don't think the fleet's as active as it will be for some of these other species. So that's my position.
Thank you, Dan. So I would like a commission member to recommend the motion.
I'm ready to recommend the motion.
I'll second it.
Who's that? Suki? Thank you,
A
Suki.
second from Suki, yes.
Thank you, Suki. All right.
Mr. Chair, we have to do roll call vote for this, as it will be for a regulatory action.
Okay, so the motion is as written on the board. Everybody has an understanding of the motion, so it no longer has to be discussed, right?
Correct.
Thank you.
To a motion. The motion's been seconded, so now we can proceed to roll call. Would you like me to make the call?
I'll make the call. Thank you.
Okay.
Bill Amaru,
Aye.
Khalil Bogdan,
Yes, I like to say understanding the concept of the utilization of the given quota. I need to say that before I make this vote. I understand, the reason for allowing the quota to be met. I vote yes.
thank you. Tim Brady, is he the
Yeah.
one who's absent, Jared, or?
No, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, Tim Brady votes yes.
Bill Doyle,
Yes.
Shelley Edmondson,
Yes.
Michael Peardnock, pardon me, Michael Peardnock,
No.
Suki Sawyer,
Yes.
and Lou Williams.
Lou is absent.
Thank you. So I'm reading the vote. 7 in favor, 1 opposed.
6 in favor, 1 opposed, with you abstaining, yes, and Lou absent.
Motion passes as written on the board. Now,
Hey,
we're gonna-
I promise we'll schedule that meeting as soon as possible, get those conversations started. Jared, what are you thinking?
Yeah,
early
we're working
November?
on the data poll now for that, so, I'll circle around with Story and Anna and see how far out we are on that, and based on that, begin to work on a meeting schedule.
Yeah. Is
I'd expect it to
November?
be
or-
the second half of October.
Okay, very good. All right, thank you, Commission.
Moving on, winter 2 scup limit recommendations.
Jared, can you take this one?
Sure. As we discussed last meeting, we are in the process of developing a new system to handle these winter 1 and winter 2 scup limit adjustments that won't require them to come in front of the commission to set limits commensurate with what the federal limits are, but instead adopt the federal limits and allow federally permitted vessels fishing in federal waters to land in Massachusetts in accordance with those limits. For 2021, we're expecting the winter 2 period, which is October 1 through December 31, that NOAA is going to adopt a 21,000 pound possession and landing limit. The baseline for this limit is, for this season, the baseline trip limit's 12,000 pounds. And then that is increased by 1,500 pounds for every 500,000 pounds that are moved from the winter 1 quota to the winter 2 quota. So based on the winter 1 underage, that trip limit is being moved from 12,000 pounds to 21,000 pounds. By adopting this limit, we'll be setting the state's possession and landing limit commensurate with the federal limit to allow offshore vessels to land fish lawfully caught in federal waters in Massachusetts ports Our inshore fishery can take advantage of this higher limit, but they'll likely not be able to do that given various existing capacity restrictions such as prohibitions on night trawling, mesh size restrictions, and area closures, and as well as the migration of these fish out of our waters seasonally. So the proposal, the recommended motion is to adopt a 21,000 pound possessing and landing limit for the 2021 Winter 2 fishery.
Questions for Jared?
Not seeing any questions, Mr. Chair.
Would somebody like to make the motion as written on the board?
Shelley will make the motion.
Thank you, Shelley. I need a second.
Second by Bill Doyle.
Thank you, Bill. Roll call.
Similarly, we have to move to a roll call vote for this as well.
Thank you very much, Jared. William Amaru.
Aye.
Thank you. Khalil Bogdan. Khalil? We'll come back.
Yes.
Tim Brady.
Tim Brady, yes.
Bill Doyle.
Yes.
Yes. Shelley, you seconded. You made the motion. Shelley Edmondson.
Yes.
Michael Piernock.
Yes.
Suki Sawyer.
Yes.
Unanimous, Jared. Motion stands.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll pull the agenda back up.
Yeah, moving along here. Items for future public hearings.
Yeah, Ray, we have 3 items that we want to present. I think Jared has a few slides for each of those. One of them is pretty straightforward. The first one has to do with the trap tag deadline for the new year. Currently, it's a June 1st requirement. It makes sense to us that since bulk of the lobster fishery takes place, in between, Cape Cod and North, that fishermen not be allowed in the month of May when the area opens after the whale closures. Doesn't make any sense to allow traps to go out with last year's tags and not have this year's tags on them, since the fleet will have had all that time to affix the tag to the trap. So we're calling for just a minor adjustment to go with May 1st. That fits nicely with the existing Area 3 federal rule anyway, which is May 1st. For LMA2, it just requires 1 month early, but most of those guys do bring the gear home in the winter anyway. So that is our recommendation. I don't think there will be, I don't think this is controversial. I don't think there's going to be any opposition to it. I know many lobstermen are strong supporters of the trap limits, and they see the ability to put out a trap with last year's tag on it as a way to subvert the trap limit. It makes sense that after the new year, any traps that are going out be properly tagged with this year's tags. So I don't think that requires any discussion, but I'll take any questions if there's any clarification that commission members are seeking.
Suki
Question.
Sawyer?
Suki, you're recognized.
Yeah, thanks, Jared. Dan, the only question I would have was seemed like the trap tag company last year was a little slow in getting the tags out. Have you ran this by them? They're going to be able to deal with this being a month earlier?
Well, that's a good point, Suki. We're going to be getting our renewals out in early December. And so I guess I would ask the fleet to be ordering those tags at Christmas. You know what I mean? There's no reason to wait. I know some guys tend to wait later than they need to, but I think the company should be able to do that. Obviously, if something blows up, we can suspend the enforcement of that rule through my authority using permit conditions. So I think it's the right approach, and I will be flexible and reasonable if something changes to the contrary.
Yeah, I agree that May 1st is a good day for this. I just hope that you get the information out to people that don't seem to pay attention to a lot of stuff. Get
Yeah.
it notified in time so they'll know all this is gonna move up in it 1 month early. That's all. Thanks.
Okay.
Thank you, Suki. Any other hands on this?
Bill Amaru.
Bill,
Yeah,
you're-
thank you. Yep. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, exactly what Suki just said. You've got to be very aggressive about getting the information out so that the guys have an opportunity to absorb it and act on it and stay within the new regulation that'll be formed. That's my only comment. I'm assuming that you've got plenty of input from the industry on this already. Dan, I know that you keep your ear to the ground.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, as much as DMF can send out notices, I think the different lobster organizations, they have to keep their membership informed as well, because a lot of fishermen just don't bother reading emails. So the onus is on everybody, not only DMF. DMF can notify appropriate people so they get the word out.
Hey, Ray, quick question for Story Reed. Story, can we stamp the outside of the lobsterman's permit renewal envelope to say, heads up, trap tags must be ordered and it must be on traps by May 1? Is
Yeah,
that something we could put on
We
the
could
outside?
do
of the
that.
envelope?
We could put a distinctly colored notice in there too that sticks out. We've done that in the past.
Yeah.
So yeah, we can do that and we'll make sure the word gets out.
Yeah, I think what happens too is because things become so routine year after year, that a fisherman might get the renewal and put it in the top drawer thinking they have a lot of time. And then by the time they open the envelope, it's like, oops, so. All right, we'll stamp the outside of the envelope if we can.
Thank you, Dan.
No further comments on this item, Mr. Chair.
Let's move it along.
Jared, do you want to cover this interesting one about seasonal lobster permit and permit fees?
Sure. So we are, the state law that establishes the seasonal lobster permit establishes it as a resident only permit. What we'd like to do to eliminate some existing confusion regarding that residency status for this permit is twofold. First, we'd want to adjust our seasonal lobster permit regulations to reflect the statutory language that states that is a resident permit, so that the omission of such it does not create any confusion that there is a non-resident seasonal lobster permit. And second, to reconcile that with the ANF fee schedule. So the Executive Office of Administration and Finance has regulations that sets the fees that executive agencies can charge for certain things. In DMF's case, our permits. They broadly have a fee schedule for DMF that just basically offers a resident permit or a non-resident, well, that sets a resident fee and a non-resident fee for each permit. We'd like to reconcile that so there is no non-resident fee for this seasonal lobster permit. The seasonal lobster permit, just for background, is the student lobster permit that allows 25 traps to be fished from June 15th to September 15th. And then in doing this, we'd also like, when we were reviewing the ANF fee schedule, it came to our attention that some of the fees are out of phase, and that's likely due to typographical errors when filing, some fee adjustments back in 2014, where some fees may not have been adjusted, or some mistranscription may have occurred. So we want to adjust these fees current with what we're actually charging in our permit, and those fees are in the table to the right. The boat 60 to 99 fee, we charge 260 and 570. The ANF fees 195, 390, and so on down that table. So that would just bring us up to speed. in terms of the commission's role in this, that was something we discussed at the last meeting. These are permitting regulations, so the director will be looking for your feedback on this. It does not require a commission vote. And the ANF regs, we would have to go to them to see if we can adjust that, and then we'd hold a public hearing on their behalf, because that's their regulations, not our regulations. So I can take any questions on these minor permitting modifications.
Questions?
Not seeing any questions, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
The last issue has to do with buoy line marking, and I'm going to ask Bob Glenn to discuss this one.
Good morning, Dan, and good morning, everybody. Thank you. This issue was something that was brought up just the middle of last week from some commentary I got from National Marine Fisheries Service. GAFO received a call from a fisherman concerned about what he would need to do to mark his gear with the new gear marking rules. He's a dual permit holder fishing in state and federal waters, and the state marking requirements and the federal marking requirements are different. So for gear fished in federal waters, have all red marks in the buoy line have a corresponding green. I'm sorry, the proposal. Excuse me. Let me step back and give you finish with the detail. Part of the issue is that currently, for Mass DMF rules, we require a minimum of 5 marks in state waters that all have to be red, with the top one being 3 feet in length. In federal waters, they only require a total of a surface marking and then 2 additional state waters marks, which are red, and then with green marks next to each of those particular marks. And as a result of that difference in the 2 regulations, what can happen is a duly permitted Massachusetts fisherman who seasonally moves his gear would only, by current federal regulation and also by current DMF regulation, would only have to put green marks next to the required federal marks in green marks in the required. I'm not explaining this very well because it's kind of complex. And as a result of that, we could have a situation whereby there would be gear by dual permitted fishermen fish in federal waters that could have a red mark without the adjacent green mark indicating that was federal. The problem with that is that it in the event of an entanglement, if only that mark was found, that gear would be inappropriately attributable to Massachusetts state water fishermen, which in the context of in the new realm under the new biological opinion, where every take is basically belongs to that of the jurisdiction who authorized the gear, we would be on the hook and possibly jeopardize either continued maintenance of our incidental take permit should we get it. And so this would be a clarification, a simple one, whereby we would just be asking that when a duly permitted fisherman, when fishing in federal waters, that any red state marks on his gear have an accompanying green federal mark next to it, so that issue can't happen. And so it's just a slight modification. Jared, do you have anything to add to that?
That issue also works both ways. So when the gear is coming back into state waters, if those green marks aren't removed, then the gear may be misidentified as being federally set gear. So for the same reason, we'd want to only have the red mark on the gear in state waters, and therefore prohibit any other tracer or marking in that line, specifically the green marking that would be used in federal waters, so that when that gear moves from federal waters back into state waters, if only that segment with a green mark, red and green mark is taken, it would be misidentified, if federal waters where it may have come from state waters. So this just clarifies that buoy line marking rule, so that any marks that may be in addition to the federal requirements are marked appropriately when crossing the jurisdiction or the jurisdictional boundary.
And Bob and Jared, just by further background, these are rules that this commission approved back in, I think, May.
Would have been June, yes.
Yeah, that is scheduled to kick in February. So, but for the fishermen who are subject to the seasonal whale closure, the fishery doesn't technically open until May. And so by going to rulemaking, we could get this completed in time before those rules functionally kick in for most fishermen.
Correct.
And then one other addition to this is Jared and I, just from a loophole standpoint in the arena of wanting to make sure that no gear gets misattributed to Massachusetts, we're also proposing to specifically disallow marks of the colors that our adjacent states are using, which would be green marks for federal waters, silver for Rhode Island, purple for Maine, and yellow for New Hampshire. So we would specifically prohibit the use of those colored marks on gear fished in state waters, just to additionally close any potential for misattribution of gear.
Okay, so we'll take questions on that, but that's the plan, to take that to public hearing probably by November, Jared? November, December?
I'm hoping so, yes.
Yeah, okay.
Khalil?
Thank you, Jared. Just a question of operation for the lobstermen. How difficult is it for the marks, the green marks, to be taken on and off when going from one to the other? Is it an easy process, or, I mean, I'm not a lobsterman, I don't know much about it, but just curious.
Yeah,
The ease of making the changes.
So I'm not a lobsterman either, but I've worked with several, and we also have Suki here on the call. But I'll comment that it's certainly not ideal to especially later in the year when you're moving gear into federal waters to try to have to do all this stuff on the fly if you're moving a set of gear. It also depends on the gear marking method that you use. Some folks prefer paint, some prefer adding in a tracer, some prefer heat shrink tubing. There's a bunch of different ways to mark gear. Many of those are only really practical back in the gear shed in the wintertime, like paint and heat shrink tubes. A tracer can be moved in and out, but again, if it's, if you're moving gear out and it's late October and it's, a pretty good blow, and it's not ideal to be stopping and marking, adding traces or taking tracers off of gear. Along those lines, we anticipate that some fishers who are duly permitted, both state and fishers who have both state and federal permits, would opt to carry just an additional set of buoy lines and have them pre-marked for either federal water use or pre-marked for state waters use. And I'll mention this later in my discussion, but Massachusetts, along with the other New England states, is currently in the process of requesting federal funds to potentially get money to assist those fishers who are duly permitted to not only buy gear marking materials, but to help potentially purchase additional buoy lines. So in fact, they could have those buoy lines pre-made and switch in and out. But that, whether or not we'll get that funding is an unknown at this point, but we're aware of the potential issue and we're trying to make strides to solve it.
Thank you, Bob. That's very enlightening. It just goes back to what Dan said earlier about visiting Bill Doyle's oyster farm. We just don't realize, the consumer just doesn't realize everything that the commercial fisherman has to go through to put the product in the market and on the table. And again, it's another regulation that the lobsterman has to undergo. And I appreciate the effort that they're going through, and anything that we can do to make it as simple as possible for them, I think is important. But thanks for the explanation.
Suki, would you like to add to that?
Yeah, thank you. Bob, I gotta disagree with you a little bit here. Unless there's some funding involved here, this is a big ask of dual permitted fishermen to have two sets of buoy lines to deal with. I mean, I see a lot of pushback on this, and I can't support this at all with there's gotta be some way to make this a lot easier than what's proposed right now. So I'm not sure what it is. The funding will probably help, but that still means you gotta carry two sets of buoy lines around, and space is limited and time. I can't support any of this. Thanks.
To speak to the proposal at hand, we wouldn't be requiring them to use two sets of buoy lines. That would be an option should funding become available, or if the fishermen wanted to. This could be accomplished, as Bob said, while not ideal, it could be accomplished through the removal or implementation of a tracer as the gear is being moved from state to federal. But it wouldn't require the use of two sets of buoy lines. Not to say that the installing the tracer is ideal by any means either.
Yeah, not at all.
Yeah, and also just one clarification that this particular change that we're proposing here isn't a change per se in the gear marking rules. DMF already passed this previous May, as long with what NOAA put in its final rule, the need for duly permitted fishermen to have differently marked gear when they're fishing in federal waters and state waters. All this does is just corrects the possible for a red mark that would be required to be fished in state waters be placed in federal waters without a green mark. That's all this does. The need to do this, to have the separate marking schemes is already established by previous rulemaking.
So this would just require the additional removal of one or two green marks, where three or four may already be being added or subtracted as the gear moves.
I understand
Shelley?
all that. I understand that, but you're asking Massachusetts fishermen to have 4 or more marks in their buoy lines. So you're not just removing 2 or 3 green or adding 2 or 3 green marks. You're adding a lot more than that. Somebody who's got long buoy lines. That's all. It's not a matter of 3 or 4 marks. It could be possibly a lot more than that if they're every 60 feet and you're in fishing 100 fathom buoy lines. That's a lot of marks. So it's just not 2 or 3 marks in and out. It's a lot more involved than that. Thank you.
Shelley?
I just had a quick question. That additional red mark, that's considered the tracer. Is that correct?
Yes, that could be a tracer, or whatever the traditional method that the fisherman chooses to use to mark, which could include a tracer.
So under the existing rule, which would not be amended as part of this, the surface system marks need to be solid. Any of the marks in the body of the buoy line can be solid or non-solid. So they could be both, either the red or green marks in federal waters could both be tracers.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Bill Amaru?
Thank you. Are we going to have to vote on this? I listened to what Suki Sawyer says. I don't know a heck of a lot about this, but Suki certainly does. And I got to say, if he's concerned about it, I guess I'm going to be concerned about it. I have a lot of lobstermen that fish in my area, hundreds of them, and they've already done a lot of marking. I don't know why this strikes me as being going a little bit beyond, but I'm going to side with Suki. I don't see that this is going to be an easy fix on the industry again.
Yeah, this doesn't have to go to a vote today. This will go out to public hearing and
Oh,
then
good.
come back
Okay.
to a vote, probably either at
That's
the
good.
December or January commission meeting.
Okay, that's going to help a lot. This needs to get out.
Sure.
We talked about.
Let me just reiterate, I want to make sure that this is clear, that this particular change will very unlikely affect most commercial lobstermen, and even will only have minimal effect on those dual permit holders. The big effect and the extra burden put on fishermen to do additional marking by having to add the extra green marks, that came in when both this commission and DMF put into place their gear marking requirements back in May, and also then again when the federal final rule just came out, and to make it official for federal waters as well. So that's already in place. This particular measure is simply just to, in rare instances when a state waters fisherman who fishes in the deeper portions of state waters has more red marks already on his line. It's just if he moves that gear into federal waters, right now he would have to just put 4 green marks on his gear. So in that case, if he had 5, like the example in the third column that Jared has, he could have 1 red mark that he wouldn't have to add green to. And if that's the portion of buoy that's recovered in federal waters, that gets attributed to Mass. So this just makes that particular example have to have a green mark next to it. But it does not, but the need to actually have separate marking has already been established through previous rulemaking.
And Bob, if I could just take just 1 minute just to give more backstory. This seems really over the top in terms of burden on the lobstermen, and I don't disagree with that. But this is the corner that we've been backed into by the legal proceedings, just as any rational person should look at the Strahan case and say, well, why would Massachusetts as a state be sued by the plaintiffs because we're complying with the large whale take reduction plan and we're leaders in that and blah, blah, blah. Well, that the argument is that we're a separate jurisdiction and they forced the courts and the judges looking at us as a separate jurisdiction. And then when NIMS came out with their biological opinion last year, they created this provision that biological opinion was only for the federal waters fishery, federal permit holders fishing in federal waters. And the message was state waters fisheries are going to have to get incidental take permits, and we're going to have to deal with them as separate jurisdictions. So this is a somewhat new development for us in the last couple of years. A rational person would say it's the lobster fishery. It's the Northeast lobster fishery. The gear goes back and forth between state and federal waters. But between NIMS's buy-up and the litigation we were just involved with, that's why we're sort of circling the wagon saying, as the Commonwealth of Mass, we have to do a really good job at delineating which of these entanglements we're responsible for and which ones we're not. Because basically NIMS has put out a biological opinion stating that they don't believe the fisheries are going to cause jeopardy to right whales, but they didn't comment on the state waters fisheries. So that's why it's a very defensive posture that we're in. And I feel badly that we're putting that kind of burden on the lobstermen, but we've been backed into this legal corner. You'd agree with that, right, Bob?
Yeah, I think you summed it up very well, Dan. It's just it really emphasizes how critical it is for any gear that's found on a whale to be attributed to whoever authorized it, because unfortunately in this current day, the next right whale entanglement that they can attribute gear to is going to be the next lawsuit, and that's just the world that we're in. And so we're pretty confident we've taken measures to to have essentially no right whale entanglements. And so we don't want to be taking responsibility for entanglements that occur in federal waters or other jurisdictions that have much less stringent whale conservation measures for us. So this is just a means to really dot the I's and cross the T's, albeit and understandably at the, it puts a burden on the industry to do a lot of additional work. And, that's not lost on me.
Any other discussion on this?
Not seeing any further comments, Mr. Chair.
Let's move along to discussion items. Updates regarding Atlantic large whale take reduction plan. I presume Bob Glenn's gonna talk to us about this, or Dan, or you? Who's got this?
Yes, Mr. Chair, that'll be me. Thank you. Jared, are you going to bring up my presentation, or would you like me to?
You can if you want.
You need to.
You should be the co-host now, so you should be able to do that.
Okay, thank you. Can everyone see my screen okay?
Yes.
Thank you. So just briefly, earlier in September, National Marine Fisheries Service published its final rules for the Atlantic large whale take reduction plan, and those changes that will affect both lobster and crab fishery mission in Massachusetts. DMF adopted nearly all of these federal changes in advance of the rule, so all the rulemaking that you all worked on last year in the winter and spring was kind of in advance of that, relative to Mass being listed as its own fishery. But now NMFS has finally published that, and so most of it is pretty much what we expected. NMFS adopted and expand the Massachusetts the Massachusetts Bay restricted area to the north from February to April 30th, based on what DMF had put forward. NMFS also adopted DMF's weak rope regulations for state waters, and then they closely mirrored our suggested gear marking requirements, with the exception that we just mentioned and that we're trying to fix. And then finally, one somewhat notable change is that in their final rule, they're saying that trap pot fishermen will be allowed to fish ropeless gear in closed areas if authorized by NMFS, and also in state waters, also by DMF. And so this option does open the door for ropeless fishing in those closed areas, but that'll be done so by their experimental fisheries permit process. And in state waters, that fisher would require both an experimental fisheries permit as well as a DMF letter of authorization. And so we'll be working with NMFS in the coming months to come up with what the criteria are going to be to allow that. And I can update more on that as it develops. The biggest difference between what we were expecting in what was in the proposed rule and what actually came out and was published in the final rule would be what is called the South Island Restricted Area. If you look at the map on the left, that is what DMF proposed and supported, and was put in the proposed rule, which is that area south of Nantucket, a much smaller block that extends to the east into Nantucket Shoals from the months of February through April to protect right whales. And that NMFS published that in their proposed rule as the preferred alternative, and that's what we were anticipating. However, in the final rule, they went with the non-preferred alternative, which is the map to the right, and that's now the South Island Restricted Area, which is it's more than twice the size. It extends well into the Cox's Ledge area. We anticipate that this will have a fairly substantial impact on some of our Area 2 fishermen out of the ports of New Bedford, Fairhaven, and Westport primarily. This is not something that we were expecting initially. We're hoping they would go with a smaller closure, but this is what goes into effect starting in 2022. Outreach on this information. NMFS has published a fact sheet with DMF input. We've reviewed it several times, identified a few errors, and the final version is up on their website and is accurate. This fact sheet highlights kind of state water specific regulations like time area closures, weak rope and contrivance measures, and gear marking requirements for all jurisdictions. And also DMF staff is currently working with NIMS to publish a mass specific fact sheet that'll be coming up in the next several weeks. And then just finally update in gear marking in general, the new rules go into effect in Massachusetts on February 1st. DMF is working with industry to develop best practices for gear marking. So we're in the process of reaching out to the industry members to get information on how they prefer to mark their gear. And we plan to host a series of kind of outreach events and gear distribution events similar to what we did last year with the weak rope, starting in early January, to both get the information out on how to appropriately mark gear in state and federal waters, and also to distribute materials to fishermen to help them with gear marking. And then, as I mentioned earlier, we are in the process with other states in pursuing funding to purchase additional buoy lines for dual permitted fishermen. But I'll have an update on that later. I don't know what the current status of that. We're waiting to hear back. So that's all I have. If there are any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
I have a question now, Bob.
You're
Yes.
recognized, Suki.
Okay, thanks, Ray. Bob, has there been any discussion at the state level about going over the right whale sightings in that western area of that southern closure to make some kind of an appeal to move that line back to the east somehow?
Yeah. So historically, Suki, when we proposed that smaller box to the east, we were looking at data from roughly 2015 through 2018. And in those years, the vast majority of all the whale sightings were heavy in south of Nantucket, with not a whole lot over towards the western portion near Cox's Ledge. Unfortunately, in 2019, and then even more so in 2020 and 21, there's been a fair amount more sightings to the west over towards Cox's Ledge. And that's where I think that that's where, under pressure from a number of whale advocacy groups, I think National Marine Fisheries Service opted for the bigger closure. The one, I guess, compromise that they made relative to what we proposed is they went with the time period we proposed. We proposed February 1st through April 30th, like the other closures. The whale advocacy groups wanted an October through April closure. And so NIMS gave a larger area, but a shorter time period. As far as an appeal goes, I don't think there's really any mechanism to do that. We can certainly, we can object to it, and I have verbally made it known that we're not really happy about it. But that said, the rule is just, it's already published. It's in its final form. So I don't know that we really have any recourse with National Marine Fisheries on a regulatory basis process to change that. But I'm sure Dan and I are happy to discuss that with you in more detail later, if you'd like.
Okay, thanks. And I had another question, Bob. I'm not sure if I read it correctly or not. The contrivance is going to be considered as marks.
Yeah. So yes. So right now, if you're fishing either a South Shore sleeve, because the orange ones have a red tracer, or you're fishing a section of red rope, or you're fishing a section of candy cane rope, which are all the approved options, all of those count for as long as they're of sufficient length, they count for the state waters mark.
What about in federal waters?
They'll count for the red portion, which shows the federal government what state the gear is from, but
Okay.
obviously you would still have to add the required green as required by NIMS.
Yeah. Okay, thanks for that, Bob.
Yep.
More questions for Bob? Or can we move along?
No further questions, Mr. Chair.
Let's move along then. Review of the recent State Waters Groundfish Subcommittee meeting.
Yeah, Ray, we held a subcommittee meeting which included 3 members of the larger commission, Bill Amaru, Mike Mckiernan, and Lou Williams. And we are trying to juggle and sort of co-manage different objectives in this action item. There's a whale entanglement issue that we want to discuss or manage for relative to the gill nets. There's the state water set aside so-called GE groundfish endorsement fleet that fishes outside of the federal plan. We want to manage that fleet in a way that doesn't exceed the set asides. And then we have some larger conservation issues related to cod spawning. So we don't have any formal proposals yet, but I think we have a brief presentation on what those issues are. But as I told the commission members who joined us in that subcommittee, this is a really confusing, set of conflicted objectives, and we're trying to figure it out in a way that makes some sense while accomplishing all the goals. So at this point, we can show some of the things we showed the subcommittee, but we're still working on those issues and expect to come back to you on October 28th with a recommendation for what we would take to public hearing, getting the input from the full commission. So, Jerry, do we have a few slides that we can show the commission at this time?
Sure. Give me 1 second. I'll pull the.
Okay.
So,
So again, just to reiterate, we have a gill net entanglement issue to resolve, especially in light of our incidental take permit application that we're putting forward. We have the many old regulations going back, a few years or a couple of decades on how to manage a groundfish fleet relative to sort of mortality controls. And then we have the issue about protecting, spawning codfish, or what's best for cod conservation, given that that's one of the big challenges of fishery managers during this era. So Jared, do you want to walk through some of these?
Yeah, I can do this quickly. So this is kind of a shortened version of what we provided the subcommittee last Friday. One of the major overarching issues here is right whales. So we have a long-standing right whale gillnet closure in Cape Cod Bay. That is the black slashed overlay on the map to the right. We have extended this closure for state waters to include Western Cape Cod Bay and a little straighter of a line along the the northern shore of Provincetown. And the federal closure is in place from January 1 to May 15th. Our closure matches that timeline, except we can rescind it in Western Cape Cod Bay and the little sliver to the east should the whales remain or should the whales depart prior to. We could also extend it past May 15th for any area within state water should the whales remain. So one of our challenges here is that in April and May, as the maps below will show, we have sightings of right whales throughout Massachusetts Bay and up around Cape Ann. So despite the small size of the gillnet fleet, which, is about 6 permit holders in any given year, there is a large spatial co-occurrence with these animals, with right whales during April and May when Massachusetts Bay is open to gillnet fishing. And a gillnet entanglement could jeopardize our ITP application and the future of fixed gear fishing in Massachusetts. So, with NOAA reconvening the large whale take reduction team, one of the things that they'll be looking into is reducing the risk posed by the Northeast gillnet fishery. Correct me if I'm wrong, Bob, but they're looking at about a 60% reduction in risk there, and they're focused on spatial closures and gear modifications. So consistent with what we expect the take reduction team will be looking at, as well as our own incidental take permit application, we're looking to get out ahead of this and expand the gillnet closure to include at least Massachusetts Bay and likely to expand that to include Massachusetts Bay, to have that closure apply for January 1 to May 15th, with the ability for us to rescind that closure early should whales depart in any area outside that / federal closure. We could also extend this closure to the entirety of state waters or around the outer Cape, consistent with the trap closure, or to the entirety of state waters. So we would not expect that those two additions would affect commercial fishing because there's not a state waters gillnet fishery in either of those areas. But it would expand the spatial extent of the closure, and it would, at least for the outer Cape, match where there is a seasonal co-occurrence with the right whales. So that's the first aspect of this. The second aspect is a April 15th to April 30th spawning closure in the Gulf of Maine. This was adapted several years ago by NOAA, and it applies in that pink box to the right. We did not move ahead and adopt this as some of the negotiations with the groundfish fishery, the state waters groundfish fishery. We opted not to do this as the habitat amendment moved forward, but considering the challenges with Gulf of Maine cod continuing, we think it would be appropriate to adopt a late April spawning closure, particularly as there are known spawning aggregations in state waters, as demonstrated through our IBS 1 and IBS 2 surveys. So what we'd be looking to do is at least match that federal closure, if not extend that April closure up north around Cape Ann to the New Hampshire border. Again, if the April gillnet closure were to be adopted, that would not impact gillnet fishing. And considering the various mobile gear closures, it would only eliminate a small chunk of towable bottom out on the eastern edge of Mass Bay, south of Gloucester, about where my cursor is, since all of this inshore area is mostly is close to that time of year anyway. And that would replace the conditional closure that you see here in the purple square to the left that we deal with every year as to whether we need to close the groundfish fishery in April based on whether the subcomponents for certain groundfish stocks, winter flounder, Gulf of Maine cod, yellowtail flounder, are going to be exceeded. And if they are exceeded, it's going to trigger accountability measures of the federal fishery. We would rescind that in favor of a more straightforward April 15th to April 30th. And so this shows you a bit of the overlay of the existing closures for the various gear types and how they would be affected by expanded April closure, and shows that there is spawning cod in that April period that we'd be looking to extend. So some of the things that we consider potentially doing to kind of give, since those two actions would take time and space away from the groundfish fishery, we were looking at potential options to amend the existing rules for the groundfish fishery to provide them with some additional access. And some of the things that we initially considered is removing the October closure from Marblehead to Plymouth, as we don't have any spawning cod during that period, and removing the State Waters Gillnet closure off Boston Harbor, which runs from May 15th to October 31. The groundfish, the subcommittee discussed some of this, and there were some concerns that an October opening would not be helpful to the gillnet fleet, as most of the gillnet fishermen are fishing lobster traps at that time of year and aren't targeting groundfish with gillnets. And opening up some of this bottom in Mass Bay to trawling would be problematic given the density of fixed gear, specifically lobster traps that would be in that area at that time of year. So that led to some additional discussion about potential trip limit adjustments that we need to consider, that we are currently reviewing and looking to consider a bit as we draft up a public hearing proposal. So those are the several items that the subcommittee reviewed at last Friday's meeting, and kind of an update on where we are with the status of those. So I can take any questions you may have.
Questions? Questions for Jared?
I'm not seeing any questions, Mr. Chair. We'll have a more in detailed memo and discussion item on this in October.
Thank you, Jared. Let's move on to the review of the recent adjudicatory hearing decisions. Dan?
Well, actually, this is another Jared item. Jared leads our something called the Administrative Law section in the Division of Marine Fisheries. He serves as petitioner in many of the cases. Cases go before an independent magistrate that reviews the evidence and holds hearings, sometimes accepts like settlement agreements. But we do a few of these every year, and I think we wanted to use this meeting to update the commission on some recent cases that have been brought to closure. I don't think we're going to comment on any cases that are ongoing at this time, but any other cases that have been brought to closure that the commission hasn't been updated on. Jared?
Yeah, so just bear with me a moment. I'm trying to find something real quick that I put together this morning that is eluding me. So just give me a second, see if I can't find this. So I can't find it, so I'm going to just proceed without it.
We could bring this up at the next meeting if you want.
Yeah, no, I could do this really quick. So the first matter that was resolved this year was the matter of David Chipperfield. That was a incident that occurred in the vineyard in 2019, where there were a violation of 2,400 or approximately 2,400 undersized whelk. A hearing was initiated to revoke that individual's permits. I settled that matter, resulting in the revocation of the individual's conch pot permit. The next matter was the matter of Daryl Rushnack. That was a egg-bearing lobster case out of the Chatham-Harwich area, and I settled that case. Was initiated in 2020 based on a 2019 incident, and that was settled with a permit suspension. The matter of John Tolley dealt with a large overage of sea bass, some reporting issues, as well as the use of the retail boat permit to obscure some overage activities. The individual in question was obtaining keeping overages from other people, or keeping overages from his pot permit and placing those overages onto other permits he had access to. A friend of his father, his rod and reel sea bass permit, and was kind of doing that under the guise of a retail boat permit and then selling it, storing it on his personal property and then selling it to a dealer as a dealer-to-dealer transaction. And it resulted in some reporting issues as well as overage issues. So that individual, that matter was settled, and that individual was allowed to transfer out of all 3 pot fisheries, transferred the sea bass rod and reel permit, be reissued a retail boat permit for the sale of crustaceans and lobsters only, and to give up their scup permit. So effectively, they're out of the southern rod and reel fish pot fisheries, are now a functional lobsterman only. Then there's the matter of Shay Doonan, whereby his individual had not renewed his commercial shellfish propagation or commercial shellfish permits and was moving product off his aquaculture grant site in Marion through his father's seafood dealership in New Bedford without a permit, and engaged in some Vibrio violations and some shellfish harvest handling violations. That individual's shellfish aquaculture license site was revoked by the town of Marion, and in accordance with that, we will not be reissuing that individual a shellfish propagation permit or a commercial shellfish permit, as his father's business was involved in this. They were all, an adjudicatory proceeding was also initiated against them. That matter was settled, and they adopted a corrective action plan or subject to a probationary period. And that was done jointly with DMF and DPH. Then the last matter I will be speaking to today is the matter of Michael Botello. Mr. Botello was a charter boat captain, commercial fisherman out of Fairhaven. In 2020, there were several incidents involving this individual, whereby he was either trying to cover overages of certain species, tatag or sea bass, on his commercial permit during for-hire trips, and was in violation of the recreational for-hire rules on several trips. This is part of a long-standing pattern, as evidenced by a number of incident reports against this individual. This matter went to hearing, and the for-hire permits belonging to this individual were revoked, as were his limited entry black sea bass and tatag permits. So those are the matters that have been resolved since we got our administrative law program up and running again in mid-2020. Those are the matters that have been resolved. Just so you guys know, as background, our long-standing administrative law magistrate retired right after the COVID hit last year. And you know, he had been working in that capacity for 30 years, and his expertise is missed. But in his replacement, we were able to hire former Commissioner Mary Griffin, who was also the general counsel for the Secretariat under the Patrick administration, to serve as the new administrative law magistrate. And we're working well under her, and that program is up and running. There was one more matter which I think I spoke to previously, but I'll bring it up again. There was the matter of Daniel Pronk, and this was a Welk trap tag case, and that individual that went to hearing, and that was the last decision that our former magistrate David Hoover provided, and that resulted in a 3-year suspension of that individual's conch permit. So that's where we are with hearings. There are several ongoing hearings, but I'm not going to discuss any of them at this time, as they are ongoing. But once those matters are resolved, you know, we'll probably give this type of update maybe once every 6 months, once every year, to go over that. So I'll take any questions.
Questions?
Suki?
Yeah, thank you, Jared and Ray. This hearing process, the MEPs have been able to access this also. Is this a separate thing in the division? I'm not sure.
Yeah, so I can kind of explain where this fits in. State law allows us to hold hearings on permits in addition to any criminal or non-criminal action that may be taken to MEP. Or so if they pursue criminal or non-criminal charges, permanent sanctions can also be pursued in addition to or in lieu of. And those can be pursued either by MEP or by the agency. Historically, MEP would bring the cases to the agency. Now it's more of and then act as the prosecutor in that. Now it's more of a collaborative or cooperative approach, whereby either the agency may, as we can dedicate more resources to pursuing these, as this is kind of part of my full-time job, I can fill in as a stand-in prosecutor for these matters and then have MEP serve as witnesses. So that's principally how it's done, but not exclusively. The matter of Pronk was prosecuted by MEP. The others I mentioned, I served as the petitioner. And so it's really, a back and forth between me and MEP as to how we want to move each case forward that we handle. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thanks for that clarification. It's always been kind of a gray area to me, Jared. I never tried a couple different times to figure out what, process was, but I'm glad that you brought this up today and explained it. Thank you.
Yeah, so they all have to be started by an MEP report, but once that report is issued, the who brings it to a hearing and who serves as the de facto prosecutor in that is kind of a dynamic discussion between me and MEP regarding how they want to pursue it and how we want to pursue it.
Great, thank you.
And Jared, point of clarification, a constable could also request an adjudicatory hearing of the magistrate as well.
That is correct. For shellfish related things, they do have the standing to do that.
Thanks.
Kevin Clayton?
Kevin, you're recognized.
Thank you very much. I just wanted to add that MEP believes that this program is very successful and helpful to help maybe perhaps level the playing field or significantly echo the enforcement efforts that the officers are doing out there. So we appreciate the work and think that it's absolutely worth every bit of pain and effort that's associated with it. And our thanks to Jared and the director for helping to maintain the program.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. I'm not seeing any further comments, Mr. Chair, if we want to move to other business.
Thank you. Other business, commission member comments. I'll start with Bill Amaru. Bill?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to say that I am very much in favor of in-person meeting again. I hope that we can get together as a group, as a commission I think we'd be far more able to accomplish our mission if we are in person. And I think the venue at the headquarters is an excellent one. It's a very large room that you met in at one time I was there as a guest. I think it'd be safe, and I encourage the division to do whatever it needs to get permission from the state to allow us to be able to meet there again. Otherwise, this is a very productive meeting. It's a fantastic opportunity to serve. I'm very happy about it. The fishing industry has been supportive of me. I have constant dialogue with most groups, and very happy to be able to continue working on these issues.
Thank you, Bill. Khalil?
Thank you, Mr. Kane. I'd just like to say to all in attendance, I'd like everyone to please join me in wishing happy birthday to Mike Mckiernan.
Happy birthday, Mike.
Oh, wow. Should we sing him happy birthday? Happy birthday, Michael.
I want to hear Ray break out and sing. Thank you, Khalil. Appreciate it. Bill, everybody, thanks.
Tim Brady?
Thank you to everyone for all the information today. There's certainly a lot going on. We've had a frustrating couple of weeks here with our cod opening between the two storms. Mostly weathered out the last couple weekends, but we're hoping for better. But that's all I have. Thank you.
Bill Doyle.
I'm all set, Ray. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. Shelley Edmondson.
Thank you, Ray. I just like to thank all the other commission members and DMF staff. I feel like I'm learning a lot from this whole experience and hope to continue to learn. And I agree, meeting in person would be wonderful to continue to move things forward. So thank you.
Michael Piernock.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Next week will be my first New England Fishery Management Council meeting. It will not be in person, it'll be remotely, and I will be sworn in. So I encourage anyone here at the table to reach out to me if there's any issues that they need to discuss. Thank you.
Suki.
All set, Ray. Thank you.
All right, I have one, I need a point of clarification because my phone's been blowing up. We just moved a motion to allow the fluke limits to go to 800 pounds. Are they still restricted to Friday and Saturday off until the recreational fishery closes? Jared, can you clarify?
No, the new changes will go into effect on the 26th. So the first Friday, Saturday, this Friday, Saturday will remain closed, but the first, second, and 8th and 9th will be open.
Okay, thank you. So this coming weekends or Friday and Saturday are closed.
Yeah, the limits go up. The limits go up, and the open fishing days are added effective the 26th, which would be the fishing week that starts on Sunday.
Right. Thank you. I have nothing else. That was a good point of clarification. Thank you very much. And I would like to thank the entire board once again for the diligence. It seems like they're reading their packets, which Jared sends out usually a week before, and then he always ad libs like 2 days before the meeting with 3 more items, but that's the way it is. So I'm going to go to the public now. Is there anybody from the public?
Phil Coates, you can unmute yourself.
Phil, you're recognized. Phil Coates, you're recognized.
Phil, you're on mute. You have to unmute yourself.
See why meeting in person would be beneficial?
I think we lost them. I think he's no longer even.
No, Phil's, I moved him to see if that would be an easier way to.
Okay. Can you unmute him?
I'm working on that. No. Phil, you have to hit the microphone button to unmute yourself. Mr. Chair, I'm not sure we can resolve this. It seems like he's still on mute.
Is there anybody else from the public? Jared?
I'm not seeing any hands raised.
Well, I would like to move forward then. I need a motion to adjourn.
Oh, I got Phil unmuted now. Phil, you there?
Can you hear me?
I can.
Oh, sorry about that, folks. I'm terrible about this kind of thing. Just a couple of things. First of all, I'm very glad for bass. I'm glad to see we're catching the commercial quota this year. I just hope it's consistent with the stock status. I think several of the commission members during the fluke discussion noted the disparity between flukes and fluke size, commercial, recreational, something that goes back to my watch, unfortunately. over 20 years, 21 years ago. And I hope it's something that can be addressed in this comprehensive fluke situation. The one thing I noted with regard to fluke abundance inshore, we do have a marketing program, and it might be interesting to take a look at sea squab, or otherwise known as sea robins, because they are very abundant in many of the areas where fluke frequent. And I just wonder if in fact there's some competition there that might be reduced if we resume eating sea squab such as they did in World War II. And one more thing, or two more things, Mike, dare not, I just wanted to correct one thing. Dr. David Dogg was working on his PhD regarding PCB uptake in lobster. At the same time, he was pursuing the dogfish issue, beginning to pursue the dogfish issue, because we were getting very upset about the fact that the protectors of sharks were reaching out and trying to protect the huge overabundance of dogfish. And lastly, I am absolutely delighted to hear the resumption, substantial resumption of the adjudicatory hearing process. If one thing commercial fishermen fear, and even a lot of the recreationals, it's losing their permit. So anyway, that's all I have to say, and I wish you all a good month, and I'll be looking forward to attending the next meeting, and hopefully in person.
Thank you, Phil. So I've got a text from Dominic Santoro. Hi, Ray. I was on the meeting this morning via Zoom. I have a question. After a motion has been made and the commission has had the opportunity to comment, are public comments then accepted? I had my hand raised via Zoom, but was not called upon to speak. Dominic Santoro.
Ray, your protocol has been that public comment will only be accepted at the end of the meeting. So that was what I was working on.
Right. Okay, thank you. I think most of the commission members felt that way also, so.
Yeah.
All right, any other hands for public comment? I don't know if Dominic's listening now, if he wants to talk now, or
Dominic's been logged off. Bill Amorous, hands up.
Bill. Bill Amaru.
Yeah, okay. I see Dominic quite often down around the docks. I'll speak to him and ask him what his comment was, and I'll get back to the commission through Jared on that, if you'd like me to.
Yeah, if I'm not mistaken, I think Jared posts that that public comment will be taken at the end of the meeting.
Yeah, well, that I understand that, but I can speak to Dominic and find out, since he's no longer with us, what his comments were.
Well, thank you for that, because if we, as you can see, we've run over our time already, and if we start opening up these action items to the public, it's going to be very difficult to, we're going to end up going back to 5-hour meetings. And they certainly have enough time to submit written comment. Okay, so you'll see Dominic, Bill, and chat with him.
That's right.
Yep. He didn't stay on for the public comment. Well, if nobody else has anything to say, and there's nobody else from the public who wants to comment, I need a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Need a second?
Second from Tim Brady.
Thank you, Tim. Thank you, Bill. If there's no opposition, I'm going to call the meeting. Any
No opposition.
No
Thanks,
opposition.
everybody.
Meeting adjourned. Thank you.